is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Limited Resources. This episode number 740. My name is Marshall. I'm one of your Limited Resources, and joining me on the line all the way from Denver, Colorado, it's Luis Scott-Vargas. Luis, you want to talk some Vintage Cube today?
Oh, always.
Yeah, we got out of bed early with the promise of Vintage Cube. We're going to take a short reprieve from MKM to talk some Vintage Cube, but we'll be back at it next week. I'll probably ping Circovitz and see if we can do the Circo episode next week. But for this week, we wanted to talk Vintage Cube, and we're going to continue our series of reviews where we go card by card on the Vintage Cube. This time, we're going to be going over red. We've done the prior Wooburg colors, and we're going to go through all of them eventually. We're going to be using the current version of the Magic Online Vintage Cube as our guide for that as well. So really excited to jump into that. And red is an exciting color in Cube these days. It used to be a little more monotone, shall we say, but now it's crept its way up. And it's got some really powerful stuff that you see on the battlefield regularly. So we will be talking about that in depth today on the show. Before we do, I wanted to say thank you to each and every one of you who are on our Patreon. It's patreon.com/limitedresources. And it's a way that you can support your favorite content creators directly. And we've got a page there. If you do sign up, you get a thank you card and a sticker in the mail. And I just wanted to say thanks to everybody over there. We also wanted to say thanks to Ultimate Guard. They support the channel as well. And they have the best products in the industry. If you want quality, if you want the absolute best that you can get, you try them out. Go to your store and hold a deck box from them versus other companies. Look, this isn't to throw shade. Other companies make good stuff too, but Ultimate Guard stuff is a notch above. They always have been. When they first came in, I remember seeing some of their deck boxes that were shown and some of their sleeves as well. And I was like, wow, these are like much better. We were kind of using the thin plastic deck boxes or whatever. Just there wasn't a lot of thought put into them. They were more about having a design on the outside or something like that. And it was just sort of a place to chuck your cards. But, as cards become more valuable, as you have more decks that you need to manage, you really do start to look at these type of products as like ways to protect the value that your cards have and make sure that they're organized and safe, and whenever you want to grab them, you're good to go. And Ultimate Guard has the best of that. Deck boxes, sleeves, ways to carry your cards. You can find it all at ultimateguard.com. And if you want to pick something up, check out your local game store or your favorite online retailer. Thank you, Ultimate Guard. We do appreciate it. Got a Patreon question of the week. This is open to all members of our Patreon. It's one of the benefits you get for being a patron. This one comes from Rob, and it is apropos of our topic today. It's about Cube. And Rob says, a question for Luis. You post videos of drafts where you both win some and lose some, with the premise of the latter being to help explain the lessons of what you learned that maybe didn't work. Sometimes that's just magic. Even in the videos you post where you end up not doing well, during the draft, you always seem enthusiastic about your picks. Given all the Vintage Cube videos you've been posting, and as new cards have recently permeated the Vintage Cube experience, what are the key lessons you have learned about, quote, modern Cube from those losses? For example, have archetypes shifted in power level? Have older cards been pushed out?
I think one of the biggest things I kind of realized was how the traditional green ramp deck was in need of an overhaul. And what I mean by that is the Vintage Cube green strategy from, I don't know, say 2 years plus ago, was generally like elves, Raphellos, big mana stuff into like Primeval Titan, Crater Hoof, that kind of thing. Yeah. I don't think that's actually the right way to draft green anymore, and that's the biggest thing that I've kind of gotten to through various losses, honestly. And I think the biggest thing is that the green decks, the best green decks now, are the green decks that go 1 into 3, and they have cards like Questing Beast and Ulvenwald Oddity, Broadside Bombardiers, Lelia, like red green, for example, where your goal is to just go Llanowar Elf into powerful 3 and 4 mana plays. And that's how I think you should draft green now. I think that's actually the best way to draft green.
What do you think about that? Because, I'll say that, like Adam, my friend Adam, when he first started learning the cube. You know, one of the early decks that he got his head around and could knew the nuances of was mono green. He ended up really favoring blue green after that. But that deck is one of the few decks I think that is a reasonable handhold for newer players that's powerful enough to still do things. It's not, I am, by the way, speaking, 4 years ago, kind of like you said, it was one of the most powerful. No, it was a reasonably powerful deck that you could play. It did big splashy things, which was exciting. And it had a straightforward game plan with a lot of redundancy, right? That you would run, 6, 7, 8 elf things that for 1 or 2 mana that made mana, and you would kind of front load those type of cards at the early game and then sort of skip over that part of the game that you just talked about. The 3 and 4 mana slot was less important. And then at 5, 6, and particularly 7 and above is where that deck could just power those things out on turn 4, pretty consistently if left unchecked. And I liked that deck existed as a experienced vintage cuber. If it pops up and it's wide open, sure, you can do it. But, we're kind of looking for a little more nuance. But kind of feels like that deck maybe as a handhold isn't so much a thing anymore. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that the classic green strategy, and this is actually part of the reason that I've made some changes. I don't have Rebelos in my cube anymore.
Oh.
It is moving a little bit away from that. And I think that that's fine. It is just, it's the sort of thing that maybe permeates to people over time, because the general public, the general cube drafting public, as it were, it just takes people a while to adjust, right? And people eventually get there. For example, I remember when Minsk and Boo first was added to the cube, you could get Minsk and Boo 7th pick all the time because it's new card, it's got a lot of text, who knows. But as people have had more time to play with it, as people watch videos or streams where people are like, oh, I'm going to first pick this card because this card's awesome. Now the card gets about, rated about where it deserves. To use a more recent example, Broadside Bombardiers is a really busted card.
Never beaten it.
No. And that card still goes a lot later than it should because, again, people haven't adjusted to that yet. So at some point, I would imagine most people will have adjusted to the fact that the green decks just look a little different and they have a different strategy. But I don't know how fast that'll be or how widespread that'll be. I just know that that's the sort of thing that just takes a little time to kind of get out into the consciousness of people. Okay.
Yeah, great question, Rob. And we're going to be doing red today, which has a little bit of overlap, as Luis mentioned, with the green deck. But, green will be coming soon as well, and we'll go deep on that. Luis, let's do a vintage cube crack a pack, right? Let's spread our wings and fly here. And then we'll start going card by card on red. Or actually, I want to get your overall take on red, and then we'll go card by card. So our first card out for our Magic Online Vintage Cube Crack-A-Pack is Through the Breach. For those that don't know, I'll give a brief summary of the card. I don't want to read every bit of every text on all these cards because Magic Online or any of these cubes, kind of does have an understanding that at least a good chunk of the cards, maybe not literally every one, but a good chunk. But Through the Breach is a way to cheat in a creature. It's 4 and a red for an instant that lets you put a creature into play and gives it haste, and you have to sack it.
Through the Breach is a fine card with Emrakul, Archon of Cruelty, to name a couple, World Spine Worm. I don't really like first picking it because it's expensive and situational, and it's a lot worse than Sneak Attack. I'd much rather start with Archon, Emrakul, or Sneak, those cards, than Through the Breach. Through the Breach is the kind of card I pick up once I'm already down that path. So I generally don't first pick this card.
Agreed. I view it as kind of a backup plan. And then in some ways, it's a backup plan to my main plan. It's like a backup plan of my backup plan, if you will. Meaning that a lot of times this type of card ends up in my deck that is primarily Reanimator, but maybe I didn't quite get the really great reanimation targets that actually stay in the graveyard. But I did pick up an Emrakul or one of the legendary Eldrazi or something like that, where I'm on that fringe where I've got a couple of ways to discard it. I've got a couple of the instant speed ways to bring it back from the yard, and a Through the Breach, will complement that strategy just fine. But I don't want it to be my primary. It's just too expensive to be, plan A for the most part. Next one though, pretty good. This is just outside of that top tier of reanimation spells, this is Necromancy, which is 2 and a black for an enchantment that lets you bring a creature back from a yard, but it has this really cool alternate mode that you can do it with flash. You can do it at instant speed, but you don't get to keep the creature. It goes away at the next end step. But that can be, to me, when I think of the Vintage Cube these days, Reanimator is one of the absolute core archetypes. It's heavily pushed. There's tons of reanimation spells and targets. And to me, it's a deck that, yes, you will often play against it, particularly in leagues, but even in the same pod, too, people can go for Reanimator. There's so many reanimation spells. And Necromancy is a pretty nice one in the mirror. Like, you could snipe somebody's, reanimation target, but also it's just admittedly a little expensive at 3, but like, it does the thing. Like, it is definitely a welcome addition to a reanimation.
Yeah. When you rank the animates, it actually just goes mana cost, reanimate, animate, dead, necromancy as the top 3.
Right.
But the reason these 3 are so much stronger than the Exhume, Shallow Grave, other cards of the world is that necromancy you can put in any black deck. Like, if you end up in a blue-black control deck or whatever, necromancy is still a fine card because you kill or counter their thing or discard their thing and you just animate it, or you animate one of your own things. So I think necromancy is a fine first pick. I first picked that card plenty.
Next is Nature's Claim, which I guess the question on Nature's Claim is, do you main deck it? It's green to destroy an artifact or enchantment, and the controller gains 4 life.
Yeah, it's a fine card to main deck. I don't think it's bad to main deck it, but I'm not excited about it.
Here's a card that you always take a little higher than I do. It's Prismatic Vista. You tap, sack it, pay a life, and you can search for a basic and put it on the battlefield.
I do like Prismatic Vista a lot. I mean, it's actually funny. So when it first was added around, I mean, the Triomes in it were added very similar to each other in terms of timing, but Prismatic Vista is a 5-color fixer, which is awesome. Now that there's a domain theme in Triomes, fetch lands I think are actually a little bit better than Prismatic Vista because you can go get a Zagoth Triome off of your Windswept Heath or whatever. But still, Prismatic Vista pick 1, pack 1 is a totally acceptable pick. I would take Necromancy over Prismatic Vista, but Prismatic Vista is probably almost every pack you open, it's going to be one of the top 5 cards. It's a very solid card. It's a fetch lands have a lot of little extra synergies, and it just fixes your mana at very little cost.
Yeah, I just keep, every time I see it, I just keep thinking of what you said, where it's like, I really just want this to be like almost any fetch land, like, because of my mana bases are so often Triome based that the Vista just feels a little narrow. I play it, I pick it. I don't know. I have it on a tier lower, I guess, than the fetches, like a tier, like not just like a little bump, but like I'm like that's. I
basically see it as the same.
Yeah, that's the vibe I get when I watch you draft.
I think it is a half step below, but it's better than any dual land, better than any Triome.
Okay, yeah. Oh, really? Yeah. See, I
think early you should. I mean,
that makes
once
sense.
You know your Jeskai, you take Raugrin Triome, and that's totally fine.
I see.
But 2 picks in when you have 2 black cards, Prismatic Vista is so much better than a Grixis Triome or something.
Okay. Yeah, fair. I think I do take the Triomes over it sometimes, so maybe I need to flip that. Next is, I think, a failed experiment. It's Massacre Girl.
Yeah, I think Massacre Girl's a blank. I mean, there's some decks you'd side it in, but you'd never main deck it, and it's not a card you basically should pick.
Right. Looks like maybe an attempt to hedge against, mono white or white red that has performed really well, and frankly, there could be a few more tools against that type of deck, but I think 5 mana for Massacre Girl's not it. Next is Teferi, Hero of Dominaria. That's the 5 mana Teferi.
I like this Teferi, but not enough
too.
to take it over Prismatic Vista or Necromancy.
Me too, but man, I like this Teferi. Like, this is the warm, fuzzy feeling Teferi. It just does everything you want, cleans off something off the board or starts drawing you cards. And in the Vintage Cube, the +1 draw card, and then on your end step, untap 2 lands is like a big game. I mean, you can make that mana work for you most of the time, especially in these colors. Great finisher for blue-white too. Next is Lauren of the Third Path.
Lauren's pretty good. The
Yeah.
3-mana 2/1 that blows up an artifact has vigilance. You can tap to have both players draw. Not on the league of these other cards. I think you should take Teferi over Lauren. If you were comparing those two cards, though, if you really like White Weenie, you could take it. But in any case, Necromancy and Vista are both in the first pickable tier, and Lauren and Teferi are in the like. I prefer to pick those up around 5th through 7th pick is about when I feel those should go.
Mm-hmm. Next is Delayed Blast Fireball, which is, if you haven't seen this, it's 1 red for an instant. It does 2 damage to each opponent and each creature they control. But it has Foretell, so you can pay 2 and set it aside. And then this Foretell cost is 4 red. And if you foretell it, it does 5 damage to opponent.
I think this card is just complete garbage and shouldn't be in the cube. I don't really understand why this one's still in the cube. Look, I get that it has this dream. You cast it off an Expressive Iteration or a Lelia. You can cast it for just 3 mana and it'll do the big effect because it's cast from exile. But in practice, this is just like a weird 2 damage sweeper for 3 mana and not a whole lot more than that. And it just has, I don't know, it just doesn't, I think this card is kind of a pet card that, has just kind of remained here for no real reason.
Yeah, and this is one that again feels like it's, trying to fight back against small creature decks. But I don't know if, that's a mandate or something like that.
It's not even that good against them. Like
right.
You cast this for 3 mana against the average White Weenie deck, you killed 2 of their 4 creatures and they don't care.
Right. Or that you killed their whatever. Is it also the only Foretell card in the cube?
Starnheim Unleashed might be in the cube as well.
Okay, I haven't seen it, but yeah, if that's the case, I do feel like
no, it's not in the Magic Online cube. I have that in mind, but yeah, that's the only Foretell card.
Yeah, so
which
that's
is also by itself kind of like whatever.
It feels like there should be at least like either 0 or 2, right? Like just make me think about it, But anyway, next Brazen Borrower.
Brazen Borrower is fine. Nothing worth taking here.
Yeah, I really like Brazen Borrower in Vintage. I like the flexibility that it offers, but you don't need to pick it highly. Next is Monastery Swiftspear. We're going to be talking about red today. Here's a
Monastery
decent one drop.
Swiftspear is another card which I think shouldn't be in the cube.
Just kill it.
Yeah, it's just I think that the good red aggro decks are mostly centered on 2 through 4 drops and are not mono red anymore.
That's the thing, right? And this feels like a mono red card.
Yeah, it is a mono red card. I mean, that's where historically it's been good.
Well, but it's supposed to be good in blue red too.
But that's just not real.
It's not supported in the cube. So
also blue red wants to keep its mana up for a counterspell and play an end of turn Vendilion Click. They don't want to bolt you and attack with Swiftspear. Like that's not really
right.
That's not really what I'm talking about here. So I just think it's just not a card that should be in the cube. There's other red 1-drops that do things like Grim Lavamancer is the kind of card that I like where it's a really solid addition to any aggro deck, but also control decks can side it in against aggro, and it's like kind of nice in some matchups,
yeah.
But I think that, and obviously like Ragavon's just busted, but like there's other good red 1-drops that are not Monastery Swiftspear. Like Beaumont Kerr is another one which I'm a little dubious on.
Okay, I'll bring that up when we'll talk about red in broad strokes before we get into the cards after this crack a pack, and we'll talk about mono red. Next, all right, Lorn of the Third Path is one thing, but Adeline, Resplendent, Cathar, now that's a 3-ball for your white deck.
Oh yeah, Adeline is a much better card, and I wouldn't endorse taking Adeline over Necromancy pick 1, pack 1, but I don't think it's like completely crazy.
There are people who you draft against regularly who definitely would consider that the correct pick.
You could just say Sandy Dog, but yeah.
Sandy Dog would take it.
So it's funny, his second most favored deck is Reanimator. But I think that Adeline is a good White Weenie card if you really are hell-bent on playing that.
I do too. Especially if you can power it out on turn 2. It's huge. It has 4 toughness, and it puts a lot of creatures and power and everything onto the battlefield in a hurry. It's a very scary card if you don't have an answer for it. And sometimes they play it on their turn, get the attack in, get the extra 1/1, and then you untap and kill it, and you're still a little bit behind it.
Yeah. It's just so big in its vigilance.
It's huge.
Too. It's just a massive card.
Next card is feeling very much throwbacky these days. It's Ugin the Spirit Dragon.
Yeah, another one which is like, yeah, clearly you can have this card in your cube if you desire to do so, but yeah, I think it's I just don't think it's a good card.
It's just
it's
so
too
awkward.
expensive. Like the juice isn't worth the squeeze on Ugin.
Right.
Like I just don't think it actually kind of works the way you want it to.
Yeah, I mean the issues that I have with it is there's this sort of little circle that you go in, and then you realize that you shouldn't be on this merry-go-round at all. But like if you're going to have a card like Ugin, then a card like Karn Liberated should be on your radar too, because it costs one less and it's, you know, an effective magic card or whatever. But you shouldn't have Karn Liberated in your cube these days. And if you shouldn't have that, then you definitely shouldn't have Ugin. And so you kind of come to this conclusion of like, well, why this one? And I know why. It's a better card. Like it can equalize the game or get you, you know, from being behind quite effectively. I mean, if you do resolve an Ugin, like, you know, it clears off basically any board state that was there under most circumstances. And that is a powerful thing that like a 7-mana Karn can't do, for example. But the deck that I always think about with Ugin is the Elves deck. And it was never very good in the Elves deck because it kills the Elves if you need to reset. And if you play it just to start plussing it, it's not that impressive. It's fine, but, you know, it is ultimately just a big dumb permanent that they may have an answer for. So, you know, conclusion, probably just time to say goodbye to Ugin, which makes me a little sad. Like, I like Karn and Ugin stuff. Like, I think that that's interesting. I think that there's a subset of players who really like to just do big things, and those are a little bit more interesting than just like crater hoofing somebody or whatever. But if we're talking about like what works, what's desirable to do, what strategies actually make you want to play them, those aren't them anymore. So I think Ugin just doesn't have a home. One way you can cast Ugin though, Luis, very easily, is if you have a Tolarian Academy. Oh man,
love first picking Academy.
I just like this is just catnip for Luis. If you've never played this card before, by the way, it's not you, Luis, dear listener or dear viewer, whatever. It's a legendary land that taps for a blue mana for each artifact you control, and it is robusto.
Yeah, I mean, when you first pick Academy, you can just take all the 0s and 1s and even 2s, and that powers the Academy up, and then you cast big spells. Not Ugin, hopefully, actually. It's like Upheaval and Time Spiral are the kind of things you want to be casting. So very happy to first pick an Academy. I've done that before, and I will do it again.
This is a funny way to end our Crack-a-Pack. We went from like Swift Spear, which you're like, just cut it. Adeline, which you respect, but, you know, isn't really where you want to be. Pack one, pick one. Ugin, which is like dated and get it out of here. And then all of a sudden we hit Tolarian Academy. Our next card is Currency Converter, which I've seen you play a ton of.
Love Currency Converter.
It goes well with Tolarian Academy.
I'll read this one out. I'm not even looking at it, but Currency Converter is a 1-mana artifact, and it has 2 tap, draw a card, and then discard a card. It also has the text, whenever you discard a card, you may exile it from your graveyard. And it has the text, tap, put a card exiled with Currency Converter into your graveyard. If it was a land, you make a treasure. If it was a non-land, you make a 2/2 black rogue. And the reason this card is sick is, first of all, it's one card by itself that can generate a bunch of tokens, right? Like artifacts, treasures, and 2/2 rogues and all that. The rogues aren't artifacts, but everything else is. But it also works really well with the cards that discard otherwise. So, for example, turn 1 Currency Converter, turn 2 Cyclorian Revealed is just awesome.
Yes, totally. And there's so many things like that like the thing about Currency Converter is it looks clunky. It looks like, is this worth a card? Like, should I, like, it's slow. What am I doing with this thing? And the first time you put it into your deck and you just play Magic, you're like, oh, okay. This thing's like pumping out something every turn or every other turn, like often, right? A treasure. And, you know, if you've ever played with Fable the Mirror Breaker in Vintage Cube, you'll understand how important just a single treasure can be. It can totally change how a game goes, especially the way that the cube plays out these days, where there's an emphasis on here and now. And so, you know, just a random extra treasure from the Currency Converter is a big game. And then it also can just become this annoying thing for your opponent if they're sitting there holding on to, you know, mana drain and a mana leak or something. And you're like, go ahead, I'm just going to start converting. And you just every other turn are pumping out a 2/2 or getting ahead on mana. It 100% pulls its weight. Like, there was a question for me at the beginning. When I first saw it, I'm like, is this playable at all? This seems really kind of clunky. And then I think I saw you play it a few times and tried it myself. And I'm like, oh yeah, this does some things, but my question was, does it pull its weight? Like, is it worth a card basically? And now it's like, it way overperformed. Like for one mana, this thing's awesome.
Pickable card.
Yeah. It's like really good.
You can take Currency Converter first pick. I have before. It's not an ideal first pick, but this is like a third pick level card. This is a tier above. And in order for this card to be good, you either have to be doing like Tolarian Academy stuff or reanimate discard stuff or have other cards that discard. But it doesn't take much. It just takes like a little bit for that to be good enough.
Right. You don't want to rely fully on the activated ability, the 2-tap loot. Like that does come up too, but like you really do want to try to be discarding.
In an ideal world, you get things started with the converter without that.
Right. Also, your opponent helps you a lot.
Oh, when you play against a black deck and you go turn on Converter and they go turn on Thoughtseize, like you just completely demolish them.
You do. You just do, because they take a spell. You have a 2/2 by the time it's your turn. It's like, it's weird. It's also, Currency Converter is one of those cards that you read and you're kind of looking for the catch, right? Where you're like, well, and it's like, no, it just gives you what you want.
The biggest level up really is that when you have Currency Converter and you discard a card with some other effect, it ends up working. Like, it ends up being the first time I cast Currency Converter and then cast Faithless Looting and I saw the converter trigger, I'm like, oh, I see.
Bingo. Yeah. And like you said, that's true for Reanimator, all those type of stuff where you're doing discard. And then, like you said, if your opponent does. So yeah, really good. Now, I'm assuming you're on Tolarian Academy over Necromancy here, Pack 1, Pick 1?
I literally made that pick in a draft yesterday.
There you go.
So yes.
So yes. And was this a draft where you were just goofing around, or did you know?
No. It's a good setup, Marshall. Good that you're doing that, because you knew that is not in fact the case. It was a draft where me and Mac and Talisker got challenged by the Austrians who have been battling us. So we very much cared about winning, and
you still
I thought that was the best pick, and I took Academy. Ended up with a sick Academy deck.
Yeah, he sent me a picture of the deck. It was absurd. The deck was awesome. So, are there any cards that could convince you to not take Tolarian Academy here? I'm assuming there's some, like if it was some Mox.
Any Mana Crypt, Soul Ring, any Mox, Lotus, Ancestral, and Time Walk, I would all take over Tolarian Academy. It'd pain me to do so.
Okay.
But I would take them over Academy. I also think if your only goal is to win, Minsk and Boo and Fourth Year Lingus are both better Pick 1, Pack 1s than Tolarian Academy.
Okay.
Like, I think it is close, but those cards are always just busted and don't have very many deck building or even mana cost requirements, honestly. So
yeah, the mana, we've talked about this before, but the mana in the Vintage Cube is very, very good with the fetch land Trion mana bases now. So, even gold cards like that don't carry that much of a tax, especially if you pick them early and you need to build towards them. Well, we did open up a card that is on your short list of things you would take over Tolarian Academy. So I'm going to break your heart today, Luis, and tell you you're not taking Academy. You're taking Black Lotus, baby. We got ourselves a Lotus. Now,
yeah, I can live with that.
so there's obviously the mystique and the legend of, okay, I've got a Black Lotus in my deck, but let's dial in a little bit. Where do you want to go with this, right? We know that this card goes into any deck, right? It doesn't have like a spot where it's bad or weak, but can we maximize on it? Is there a direction that we can go where Black Lotus is even better than it would be in a normal whatever creature deck or something?
Yeah. So for Black Lotus, what you're really looking to do in an ideal world is find spots where you have good proactive, like 4 mana plays. 4 is the sweet spot because Land Lotus 4. Cards like Minsk and Boo, cards like any of the like initiative creatures, if you're playing with those, like Caves of Chaos Adventure, a Planeswalker like Jason the Mind Sculptor, something that's going to get you value or be a massive threat. And like in White Weenie, Black Lotus is just, like kind of like the card that can just power out a thing. That being said, Lotus has some other things going for it too. You can look for Underworld Breach and Yawgmoth's Will, ways to replay the Lotus. It goes great with Tolarian Academy, as does any cheap artifact. Goes well with Trinket Mage. So it's like, on the one hand, like, yeah, like Lotus doesn't go wrong no matter what you do with it. But you really should, like, I think the best place to Lotus is if you're in a proactive, like mid-range or aggressive deck. Like in a control deck, it's not very good to Lotus and sack it to cast a counterspell. That just doesn't really do anything.
Right.
So you really do want to be playing with cards that you can just get onto the board, and they're greatly benefited by getting onto the board sooner.
Okay. Well, congrats. Condolences, honestly. Like, I know how much it pains you to pass the Solarian Academy, but I guess you can make do with Black Lotus. Let's talk about red now in the Vintage Cube. Before we go card by card, can you give us an overview? You know, we got to touch on it before when we were talking about Monastery Swiftspear, and you were saying that, you know, in prior, you know, there was mono red, or that card would go into a mono red deck, but you were saying not so much anymore. It's not really a thing.
No, so I think I view red as kind of like a support color of sorts, where I think the best red decks, like red is nice because it pairs with any color. Like you can play white red, and when you do, white's going to be the dominant color, but you're splashing red for Comet or Caves of Chaos Adventure or Broadside Bombardiers or whatever red, you know, gut, whatever powerful red card, plus maybe some burn spells. And then when you are drafting blue red, you're playing mainly blue for counter spells and card draw, red for cards like Chain Lightning and Lightning Bolt, or cards like Third Path Iconoclast, something like that. And basically every red combination, red's like kind of the non-dominant one. So like when you are playing black red provides the early aggression creatures plus some of the discard outlets for black's reanimate stuff. Black red is probably the heaviest base red deck. Like that's probably the closest to a base red deck, because red green is also like red is providing some of the threats, but is not in and of itself, you know, the main color. So right. I view red as a very good secondary color because it has a bunch of really powerful, like cards like Lightning Bolt and Chain Lightning go well in any deck. They're just cheap, efficient burn spells. Cards like Gut and Lelia and Broadside Bombardiers are great for any like assertive or aggressive deck. Cards like, you know, the blue-red gold cards are all very strong. Expressive Iteration deck, you know, that sort of thing. Lutri, whatever you're choosing in those slots. And I mostly view red as one of the best secondary colors, with the exception of black red. And I just don't think mono red is very good anymore. Like cards like Hellrider don't see as much play as they used to, just because I don't think that's the strategy most red decks are going to want to go. Yeah. And it's not basically, you know, the gains you get from being faster aren't really worth the losses you get from having to play either play some weaker red cards or to have to leave out the second, what you get from a second color.
Yeah. And, you know, go ahead.
I was just going to say, and so red is fantastic at like bolstering other colors, but is less good at carrying the load itself.
You know, the way that I view red to illustrate the change that it's gone through and how it's represented now versus how it has been traditionally, and it was for a very long time in the Vintage Cube. Really, it before was kind of a one-note color. It was basically hyper-aggressive burn spell style deck that was good. I remember used to draft it for a while. Like it actually was quite good, but you know, it didn't see a ton of play because it's a little bit boring, you know, to draft. And not that it's actually pretty fun to play, but when you start drafting it, there's kind of a pick order type thing that you're just like this, if not this, then this, and you just sort of become a little algorithm that just kind of does the same thing over and over. And some people enjoy that, fair enough. But I think that the majority of the cube audience, you know, they're open to playing aggressive decks, but you know, that one got a little bit simplistic. But as an illustration of what's different with red, because as we've seen over time, green and red, they have many more things available to them now. Is before, which by the way, it's not even in the cube anymore, was Sulfuric Vortex was like the 3-mana enchantment that destroyed people.
I mean, right? To your point, cards like Sulfuric Vortex, cards like Eidolon of the Great Revel, Shrine of Burning Rage, these cards it's not like they all got cut because red was like they wanted to nerf red. It's just these cards got cut because they were worse than the other options. Right. And then over time, that meant red got worse and worse at doing that specific thing. I think red's still a great color. I just don't think that the mono red deck, like you mentioned, that just does a bunch of attacking is really where you want to be. Yeah.
And, you know, again, as an illustration, you know, a card that we thought about a lot was Sulfuric Vortex. at 3-mana enchantment. Well, guess what we think about now? Fable of the Mirror Breaker, right? Might be the best red card in the whole entire cube, right? It's a first pickable card, you know, in some packs. It's a card that every deck wants to try to get in there and splash for and stuff. And think about the difference between those two cards, right? They're both 3-mana and they're both red and they're both enchantments, but like that's where the similarities end. The old version was how red used to approach games, which was lock out your opponent from gaining life and burn them. Like, I mean, it was like this very narrow strategy. And Fable the Mirror Breaker represents like the new red, where it is not fast. You know, it's a, you know, as far as getting your opponent dead, it's a much, much, much slower card. But think of all the cool options you get out of a card like Fable. It takes you in all different directions. It goes in many different, really any deck that could cast it, but it's really good in many different decks as well. You know, Reanimator, stuff like that can take advantage of this card. Yeah, and that to me kind of encapsulates it, you know.
It's really hard to argue that red's gotten worse when cards like Broadside Bombardiers, Fable, Gut, all these just incredible 3-drops are part of the color now. It just, an Inti is an awesome 2-drop. Like, it's gotten a lot of gas. Like, one of the archetypes that's actually new is red-black Reanimator. That used to not be a thing. It used to be that Reanimator was mono-black or blue-black almost exclusively. And now, and Faithless Looting wasn't quite enough to get it over the line. But now, again, Fable, Inti, like, there are reasons to be in red, and also just red-black mid-range with removal and discard, and then uses and red burn spells and has a reanimating theme is just a good way to draft Reanimator, where you're not all in, but you can still have broken starts. So red's doing just fine. It just looks a little different than it used to, which is good. It means the metagame's evolving, you know?
Yeah. And, you know, I would say that when we go over the card by card here, there's a couple of things that will stand out, or at least that will inform Luis's and my opinion. I think we're of the same mind on this, which is that there are going to be some cards that are more looking back than looking forward, right? They're kind of callbacks to when red was hyper aggressive. And not that they have like no home at all in the current cube, but definitely the umbrella under which they sit is a lot smaller than it used to be. In fact, it may be small enough that we should just boot those cards. And then the other thing that stands out is that I think of red as a mid-range color now. You know, it's the 2 and 3 mana creatures that I really, you know, you mentioned them, and you didn't even mention Lelia, which is like old news now, but like that's a really powerful, potent card that, you know, maybe it's gone down a little bit because the even newer cards have started to push it out, but like that's another, you know, very mid-range powerful card that sees a lot of play in the Vintage Cube as well. And those type of cards are more representative of what red is to me now than Monastery Swiftspear, for example. Or our first card. Let's get into the cards here, Luis. Technically not red, but certainly in spirit red. It's Bomat Courier at the 1-drops. We're going to go through the creatures first, and we'll do them by mana cost. And as usual, you know, we do these reviews a little bit differently. We'll go through and talk about each card, and then we'll assign a GOAT from each tier category.
Yeah, so we kind of have covered a lot of how we feel about these really aggressive 1-drops in a little preamble, and Bomat Courier just fits right into that. Like, yeah, it's
maybe the poster child for that.
Yeah, well, I mean, naturally these cards are getting cut one by one, and I've cut even more of them than the Moto Cube has so far. You just don't, as these cards get 8 power leveled pushed out, it makes all the remaining ones weaker too. When Sulfuric Vortex left because it wasn't good enough correctly, it made Bomat Courier worse. Even though Bomat's like kind of hanging on by its fingernails, I just don't have Bomat in my cube anymore. I think it's good in a base red aggressive deck, but like hyper aggressive, just so crappy if there's creatures in play. And that's the other thing about Bomat. Vintage Cube has actually gotten a lot more creature dense than it used to. Almost every, like, it's just because creatures get printed at higher power levels than spells in general now. So, and the curve has gotten lower. When you're playing against a blue-black deck, which used to just not have any creatures, now it's like they could play a Lazav, or they could play, you know, Kite Sail Larcenist, and they have Baleful Strix, and all of a sudden, or Evolved Sleeper. It's like the Bomat doesn't just get to attack 4 times with impunity. So,
right,
I think Bomat's pretty low on the scale.
Do you think it's just time to let go of cards like Bomat and Monastery Swiftspear?
Just embrace Red's new identity and try to have its cheap creatures be value creatures too.
What about complementing white, right? Like some of these creatures can go into like a Boros aggro deck that is actually a heavy curve out.
Right. Like
classic
Inti, for
aggro.
example, is great to complement white in like an aggressive deck. Like that's a card I don't mind playing, even if it's one of those 6 red cards.
Okay.
Whereas Beaumont Courier is just not that.
Right, because Inti is cool in other decks too, right? So that's kind of what we're looking for. All right, so Beaumont Courier, get out of here. Next is one that, typically would go into a spells deck. It's Dragon's Rage Channeler.
I like Dragon's Rage Channeler. This is like you said, a good card for us. Like blue-red spells, it can be really good because you can get it out really early and then keep mana up. And every time you cast a counterspell or a preordain or a lightning bolt, you get to a little card selection. Plus, it becomes a 3/3, which is a real threat for 1 mana. And it's good in like red-black, where you're like using it to put creatures into your graveyard for reanimator shenanigans. So yeah, I like Dragon's Rage. I think it adds a lot to the cube. It's a fun card to play with. And
also, it's like playable 1-drops are good too. All right. It's time to have the tough discussion here. Might not even be that tough. Goblin Welder. It is still somehow hanging on. It does have it is a interesting, cool, and potentially very powerful magic card. You can swap out stuff from the graveyard to the battlefield, and you can even do it to your opponent to mess up stuff. It only costs 1 mana. It has fun build around potential that makes you think, ooh, I could do this, that, or the other thing. But when you actually play the Vintage Cube, it never happens. Like this thing just, it's stopped trying to make fetch happen. Like it is not, it's just not there, right? I don't know if it doesn't have enough targets. I don't know if people just aren't interested. If somebody plays a turn 1 Goblin Welder, I'm used to be really scared. I used to be like, oh no, and now I'm like, whatever. Like I just ignore Goblin Welder in the packs. I mostly ignore it on the battlefield. I feel like I can kill it if I need to. Is it time to just let this thing go?
So it's funny you say that, because yes, I've thought that for a while. Mm-hmm. I haven't wanted this card in Vintage Cube. I cut it from mine. But as of yesterday, I re-added it, and here's why I want to make a case for it. I don't think the current Vintage Magic Online Cube supports Goblin Welder enough. I think the card is not good enough. But there's a couple of Warhammer 40K cards that if you were to play with those, I think actually change things. And this is a little bit of a sales pitch for those. So one's Triarch Praetorian. It's 1 and a black for a 2/1 flying artifact creature.
Okay.
And it has Unearthed 4 and a black. But it also has another ability which says when it enters the battlefield from a graveyard, draw 2 cards, lose 2 life. So you cast this card or discard it for value, either way, and it gets to the graveyard, right? It's a 2-mana, 2/1 flyer. Those things are kind of fragile. And then if you weld it into play, you draw 2, lose 2. If you unearth it with its ability, you draw 2, lose 2. Or if you reanimate it, yesterday I used the card Unearth, the 1 black mana spell.
Oh, nice.
Like turn 1 Faithless Looting this, turn 2 Unearth it, draw 2, lose 2. It's pretty sick.
Okay.
So, and then there's another one which is kind of interesting too, which is, let's see, where did that idiot go? It's 5 mana. It's 3 and 2 black mana for a 2/2 is Royal Warden. Here it is. 3 black for a 3/2. And when it enters the battlefield, you make 2 tapped 2/2 artifact creatures.
And it has an artifact itself?
Yeah. And it has Unearth itself for 3 and a black. So again, with Welder, if you weld this in, you get 2 artifacts, and then you have a bunch of artifacts to weld in and out. And a card we've already added as well, Necron Deathmark, 3 black 5/3 flash artifact creature. When it ETBs, destroy a creature and mill 3. And then there's the Chaos Defiler, which we've talked about, the 3 black 5/4, which is also an artifact. And when it enters or dies, you get to destroy a permanent. So once you add all that stuff, I think Goblin Welder and Goblin Engineer actually are good enough. I don't think they are in the current Vintage Cube, which is actually really funny.
Okay. I like that like I would prefer to have Goblin Welder around because it's one of the most interesting cards, right? Like It is not straightforward. It does require build around, but at 1 mana, it's very, very powerful. And it does lead to some of the weirdest interactions you've seen, especially if you start messing with your opponent's stuff. So that's cool. So maybe just a little bit more support, and then Goblin Welder will be back. I am not an advocate for dumping it, except for that it has just felt like it's been a really long time since it's been relevant. Next is Grim Lavamancer.
I like Grim. It's just, it's good in an aggro deck. It can be good in against aggro decks. Good in like a mid-range deck. Uses your graveyard as a resource. Plays kind of interesting. It's a solid card. I wouldn't cut it. It's not a great card.
We talked about Monastery Swiftspear, which is the next one. The next one after that, though, is an even more to the point about Monastery Swiftspear. It's Rabbit Battery.
Yeah, I don't like this one either. Again, I just don't think so this is 1 mana, 1/1 haste, but also you can equip a creature and give it haste and +1/+1 for a red.
Yeah.
I just don't think that these kinds of cards work in the cube, so I'd rather just not have them.
I think so too. It's simply too low power level to be a thing. Next card, not too low power level. It's Ragavan Nimble Pilferer. This is one of the scariest 1-drops you can play in the cube.
Yeah. So Ragavan's funny because it's correctly a card people take very early because it's a very strong card. When you draw it in the middle or late game, you're just like, man, I used my first pick on this thing.
Right.
But sometimes you just cast it on turn 1 and the game just ends.
Yep.
Like straight up, you go turn 1, Mountain Ragavan, and their hand doesn't have a 1-drop.
Right. They go try land.
Yeah, you're guaranteed to be on 3 mana on turn 2, assuming you have a land drop, of course. And maybe they'll play a card off the top of your deck. All this stuff, like it's just completely out of control good.
It is. And this goes back to what I mentioned before about treasures. I mean, getting a treasure that early in the game can be backbreaking because the turn 3 plays, or I shouldn't say turn 3, the 3 mana plays in the cube are where it's at right now. And they are really, really strong. And red has some of the absolute best. So if you can go turn 1 Ragavan and then turn 2, play a 3-drop, like you're way ahead of wherever your opponent's going to be. I agree. This is an upside card. That's it. I mean, there's many decks that it's not very good against. There's many game situations where you have that feeling that you described, but it is all erased by the fact that when you play this on turn 1, or even if you get to dash it in slightly later when your opponent, kind of have their shields down, it pays for itself pretty quickly. Another card, again, this is a throwback. I don't know what we replaced these with, but this is Soul Scar Mage. It's kind of another copy of Monastery Swiftspear in some ways.
It's like a worse Monastery.
It's just worse. Yeah. So like this is one I, don't want to see in the cube anymore. I just don't think it's supported. What about our last 1-drop, which is Voldaren Epicure? That's the red 1/1. And when it ETBs, it deals 1 damage to each opponent and you get a blood token.
I actually like this one. The reason I like this one is that it can be good in an aggressive deck, though you usually don't want to play it unless you have like a Skull Clamp or some other way to like use the thing. But it's pretty good in Reanimator decks, and
it is.
It also makes an artifact. It's so good with Gut, right?
Yep.
Gut is when you attack, you can sack
an
artifact or creature to make a 4/1. This not only lets you have an attacker, so because Gut's biggest problem is that you need something in play when you play Gut to attack and trigger it, but it also gives you 2 things to sacrifice to it. It's awesome. So
yeah.
Epicure carries its weight. I think Epicure is a fine inclusion to cube.
I do too. And it is a card that's easy to overlook. It's one of those cards you can pick up late, and it can complement a deck that maybe you didn't think it could. Like you said, Reanimator or any deck that cares about artifacts or Skull Clamps or anything like that. Voldaren Epicure is kind of cool. Goat for the 1-drops is Ragavan.
Yeah, not close.
Not remotely. 2-drops. First one up is Embreath Shieldbreaker. That's the one that you can play red for battle display, which destroys an artifact, and then that's the adventure, and then you can pay 1 red to have a 2/1 with no other text.
It's solid. I think Shieldbreaker makes the cut.
I do too.
For a variety of reasons.
Mostly a sideboard card, but yeah, fine. Next one. This is one that they put back in. I don't remember if it was in before, but it's Goblin Cratermaker, which is the 1 and a red 2/2, and you can pay 1 and sack it to have it do 2 damage to target creature or destroy a colorless non-land permanent. Mostly artifacts, but there's maybe a few others.
I think this one's pretty borderline. Like, it is definitely a playable. It can kill things. You can kill a sneaked in Emrakul, actually. It kills a colorless permanent.
That's funny. Do it before it attacks.
Yeah, that's a good call. But
thank you.
I think that Crater Maker, I could take it or leave it.
My gut is leave it. Like I never played in the main, but I've had it do relevant things, so maybe it's okay.
I like it with Luris.
With Luris, yeah.
Any 2-drop or 1-drop that you can sacrifice for something is good with Luris.
Freaking Luris.
On a side note, I think that when I companion Luris, my like average win rate is like above 2 wins per draft. It's crazy how much that card
you play that
deck
like a fiddle, man. I've never seen anything like that. you are in your zone for sure.
Well, all I want to do is trade off cheap things and then play a card that draws me a card every turn.
Right. And it's a spell like every turn. Next is a somewhat newer one to the cube. It's Goblin Engineer. This is, if you haven't seen, it's 1 and a red for a 1/2. And when it ETBs, you can search your library for an artifact and put it into your graveyard. And then you can pay red, tap it, and sack an artifact to return an artifact with converted mana cost 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. So it's kind of like a weird new Goblin Welder, but it does search up something for you to go get when you cast it. But it just has to be cheap to get back with the Engineer. I have found this to be too clunky. You can get an expensive card with it. You can. It's just if you want to get it back with the Engineer, then you can't. But to me, this has felt too clunky. Have you seen anybody do anything interesting with Goblin Engineer? Is it a real card?
Yeah, I mean, well, it's tricky. If Goblin Welder is good enough, then Goblin Engineer is good enough.
Really?
Like, I think that if you want one, you want both. I can't really conceive of a cube where you'd only want one of these two.
Okay. Well, I guess my thinking on it is that Welder scales in a way that's like unchecked, right? Like I can switch out a 0 mana or 1 mana artifact for a 7 or 9 mana artifact, right? Where Goblin Engineer, I can do that. So, okay, maybe it just slots in. What's the key with the cheaper one? Like, do you get a cheaper artifact with it most of the time and then get that back and then get things rolling? Or are you supposed to use it to get your 9 mana artifact in the bin?
I mean, you could do both. Like part of the reason I like the Triarch Praetorian, and I also understand that Warhammer is really weird. I don't know what their status is on adding Warhammer cards or not to the cube is.
I mean, they put everything else in, so.
Yeah. But because you can engineer it back. But I view it as like welding out little trinkets for, it doesn't have to be monsters. It could just be value cards. I see. Imagine welding in cards that, draw you a card or do a thing or two. Like it's really not, I think, that big of a deal that Goblin Engineer can't cast or get the big expensive cards into play.
Next one has been an impactful card. You were very early on it, and after your review of it, I tried it, and I was like, wow, this card's just really good. It's Inti, Seneschal of the Sun. This is the 1 and a red 2/2 legend, and whenever you attack with anything, you may discard a card. If you do, put a +1/+1 counter on target attacking creature, and that creature gets trample until end of turn. And then if that's already like a potent effect, especially considering that it doesn't have to attack itself. But then it also says, whenever you discard one or more cards, exile the top card of your library and you can play that card until your next end step. So you just get those, you convert those into cards off the top of your library.
I mean, Inti is incredible. Inti puts a ton of stats into play, gets to attack for it triggers right away. First of all, when your opponent, when you have a creature in play, you just cast Inti attack, Inti triggers. It lets you trade your bad cards for good ones. It just gives you gives you everything you want. It gives you board presence, gives you card advantage. Like it's technically even, right, where you discard a card and then get to play a card, but like it triggers off every discard. So again, if you Faithless Looting, Inti triggers. It just kind of does it all. And the only thing holding me back from putting it in every deck is you do need other creatures. It can't be one of your 3 creatures. But as long as you have other creatures in your deck, I mean, it's great in red white, it's great in red black. It's probably the best in red black because the discarding is even an advantage when you're discarding an Ashen Rider or something.
Yeah.
And it can be great with red blue. You want 1-drops if you have it because the 1-drop into Inti can be good. Though that you don't always want to discard on turn 2 because you probably won't play the card off of it. But you do want the +1/+1 counter, and trample that adds up really fast too. That's the sort of the clever part of this card is the second clause about discarding and stuff. But like the game also does come to a pretty swift conclusion if you're just throwing a +1/+1 counter and trample on every time you attack with something. It adds up really quickly, and it usually keeps you ahead of any type of creature-based curve and just demands removal. But imagine a simple scenario where you have a 2-powered creature and you put a counter on it. It has 3 power. It gets in, and now your opponent has 1 removal spell. Do they kill the Inti? Do they kill the thing that's killing them? They probably kill the Inti, and now they have to just take 3, from your 1-drop or whatever. It adds up really quickly. Yeah, it's just a really strong card.
Bit of a throwback here. Another one that I would put into that Bomat Courier, Monastery Swiftspear bucket is Kari Zev Skyship Raider. The thing about red is that when you look at the cards that are good now in red, they give you options, right? Like Inti is a good example of that. You're making choices, you're, smoothing out your deck, you're also applying pressure. It kind of does it all. These older cards, all they do is get damage in. That's it. Like Kari Zev's job is to get damage in. There's really not much else you can do with it. Same thing with Soulscar Mage, same thing with Swiftspear. They're just damage output is sort of the name of the game. And red, and specifically the downfall of mono red, means that raw damage output isn't at a premium.
Yeah.
You can do it, and Kari Zev's pretty decent at it. Not amazing. I mean, it's a little embarrassing to have Inti next to Kari Zev. Like, Kari Zev used to be fine, but Inti's just like better at everything that Kari Zev does and gives you card selection / card draw. Like, it's just stupid. But Kari Zev to me is a card that they could cut easily, and I wouldn't even blink. Like,
I think Kari Zev is just not all the reasons you said, not really part of what red should be doing these days.
Right. And, and then like the next card is a good example of one that is not as powerful as like a card like Inti, but is more interesting. It's Magda. Magda is 2 mana, 2/1, and when you attack with it, you get a treasure. And like treasures are a big, big deal in the cube right now. And this card matters. If you play it on turn 1, it's like, oh man. And even if you play it on turn 2, like your opponent really has to decide, like, can I afford to let this thing attack? Can I afford to let it attack into a blocker? Like it does matter where you can fall so far behind if they can get to the 3 or 4 mana slot earlier. It's just not like raw power, right? Like we're not looking at a card like Inti here, but like Magda's okay. Well, kind of interesting.
This is why mono white has gotten stronger over the years and mono red has gotten weaker. Mono red still can kill you relatively quickly. Luminarch Aspirant's a hell of a clock, playing Usher of the Fallen into almost any 2-drop is going to put some pressure on you. But that being said, you still get cards that are good in the long game. And mono red just doesn't have that. Like its cards are good early, but they're not good late. And you end up in a spot where if you don't kill them early, your deck just kind of falls apart. Whereas mono white can just win long games against anyone. Like that's just kind of how that deck plays out.
Right. And there's more of a consistency of strategy right now. Like if you look at the white 2-drops, which we did, by the way, you can go back and listen, but most or all of them have good damage output and then either protect your stuff or disrupt your opponent's stuff. Right. And they're all you can kind of group them into that category. If they don't have those things, then they're just very powerful, like, Stoneforge Mystic or something like that. But when you look at the red, it's kind of all over the place, right? Like you've got these oddly defensive cards like Embrus Shieldbreaker, Goblin Cratermaker, which their damage output isn't impressive, but they do things that are relevant to the board on some level. Then it's just like curveball with a card like Goblin Engineer that isn't about damage output at all in any way, right? Then you get just all-star like Inti, but now, Kari Zev only damage output, Magda damage output medium, but with this extra bonus ability. And that, like, our next card is Rada's Firebrand, which is back to only caring about damage output again, right? And we'll talk about Firebrand in a second, but like the next card is Robber of the Rich, which is now straddling the line. And then you've got Scrapwork Mutt is our last red 2-drop. And that again is not emphasizing damage output. So it's like you get kind of push and pull. They don't all have to be the same. I'm not saying that they should make it that way, but you see why white's really good when like 9 out of 11 of those 2-drops all do the same thing. They just do it on different, levels of power or whatever. So back to Rada's Firebrand. This is the type of card that I'm just like, I'm not interested in these really for the thing. I get it. Like there's a domain sub theme, but like the freaking thing is, I don't know. This to me does not ring as a domain payoff.
Yeah.
I know it is
agree.
Technically, but it just doesn't like play that way.
Yeah. I don't think it's a very good domain payoff.
Now, Robber of the Rich, I do like though. Like this one does straddle that line of getting damage in, but also being interesting.
Yeah. It has the card advantage part of it means that there's times when this is good, even when you don't care about the damage. And that's just an important aspect of the card.
Right. And it does make a cool game dynamic, like when you're checking hand sizes and like, you know, do you have any other rogues? Like just weird little stuff like that. And then the last one is Scrapwork Mutt, which is kind of well suited actually for the vintage cube, right? Like cards go to the yard all the time. Getting cards into the graveyard's a big game. You talked about the red black reanimator deck. This goes into that.
Yeah, I think Scrapwork Mud has enough synergies between the artifact stuff, the reanimator stuff, that it is definitely worth a slot. It's good with Skull Clamp, though. One note is if you unearth it, don't Skull Clamp it because it won't die. It'll just get exiled.
I saw you talk about that on your video, and I did not know that. That had not come up for me.
I've seen so many Skull Clamp.
And I was like, I'd be so bummed if my plan was that and it didn't work and all that mana just went away. So the GOAT is definitely Inti, right, in this category.
Totally.
But what is second for you? Is it Robber? Scrapwork Mutt, Magda maybe on the list?
I think Magda is a really strong threat. Like if you play a Magda on turn 2, your opponent's going to have to deal with it.
Yes.
It just gives you so much of an advantage every turn that they don't. Plus, there's sometimes you get like Smuggler's Copter or Reckoner Bankbuster vehicles. You can just crew them with Magda, and Magda gives you a treasure whenever it becomes tapped.
Yeah, there's some really cool stuff with that. It also does have an activated ability that comes up very rarely, that you can sacrifice 5 treasures to search your library for an artifact or dragon and put it on the battlefield. It does actually, I mean, I've seen it happen. It's not a primary plan, but like if you pile up a few treasures and like a random 0 mana artifact or, you know, boom, you know, you can sack the 5 treasures and go get whatever your best, you know, go get your 1 ring or, you know, something weird like that. But yeah, I think that there's like a scale in our head that exists, right? That like when somebody plays a card, particularly early in the game, like how much am I feeling it? Right? Like the number one for that is Ragavan. Like, and I'm not even just red, like just in the cube. If somebody plays turn 1 Ragavan on the play, that is like 10 out of 10. Like my blood pressure's up. What am I going to do? Do I have an answer? But Magda's on that list. It is not on that level, but it is like, oh, I do not want to let my opponent start turning that Magda sideways. Like this game will 100% snowball if that happens. So yeah, I like Magda number 2 there. The 3 drops, just the classic, right? Just the absolute right down the middle red card, Bone Crusher Giant.
Yeah, Bone Crusher is solid, very solid. You're never like stoked to have it in your deck, but you're always like, this is going to be good, and it always is. It
always is. It always makes the cut. Next is, I think, at this point, a failed attempt, which is fine, you know, just experimenting. This is Brea's Apprentice. This is the 2 in a red 2/3. And when it ETBs, you get a 1/1 Thopter that's an artifact, and you could tap and sack an artifact to exile the top card of your library until the end of the next turn. You can play it, or you can give a creature +2/+0 until end of turn.
I think if you want the wilder stuff, the Brea's Apprentice makes sense to me. It's definitely not the strongest card in the world, but it's fine. I find this card to be okay. It's more of a sideboard card. I don't always main deck it, but it's good against aggro decks. It's good in an artifact deck because it's an artifact itself and it makes another one. It's good with Skull Clamp. There's just like a lot of little things it does, which it does fine. So
I just feel like maybe because it's red, I don't know. Like if this card was blue, I think we'd see it all the time or something, but
it'd be a lot better if it was blue.
I think I would kill it. Yeah. Okay, so this next card has been majorly impactful in its debut. It is Broadside Bombardiers, and I'd never have beaten this card ever. It's 2 in a red for a 2/2.
Nobody has.
Yeah, it's 2 in a red for a 2/2. It has Menace and Haste. Fine. But it has Boast, which is a thing you can do if you've attacked this turn. It says, sacrifice another creature or artifact. Broadside Bombardiers deals damage equal to 2 plus the sacrifice permanent's mana value to any target. And as long as you've attacked this turn, you can activate it only once, but you can activate it. So once you satisfy the requirement with your Menace Haste creature, by the way, of turning it sideways, now you can use it. So you can use it to get rid of a blocker. You can use it after combat to kill your opponent. You can just do, it's so flexible and it's so much damage. I can't believe they put 2 plus that amount.
unbelievable.
It really
is what the
is.
card is.
Like I actually want it out of the cube because it's too good. It just feels broken.
I mean, it is, but I think that it's a really strong card. The fact that it does +2, when you throw a 0 mana card, it does 2 damage. Like, you could play a Nettle Cyst and throw the Germ to deal 2 or whatever.
Yeah, come on.
But I think that it's certainly a very powerful card, and I wouldn't cut it due to power level, but it is near the top of the curve. Like, it's just one of the best cards in the cube.
I'm already sick of it. The weird part is that, like, it is fragile. I mean, it's just a stupid 2/2 and it costs 3 mana. So you'd think like, oh, some removal would do well here, but it seems like it's so flexible because you can throw stuff to get blockers out of the way to keep attacks coming. And since it has menace, it basically ensures it'll be able to get turned sideways the next turn. But once the blockers are done, or if you don't have any, they can just play 4 or 5 mana or 3 mana things and just start chucking 5, 6, 7 damage at your head, plus the 2 that it did, plus whatever else you're up to. Like, it's so weird. It's almost like reductive, right? Like, you play a 4 mana planeswalker, then you're like, what would be better than that? Just doing 6 to you. So I'm just going to sack the stupid planeswalker and dome you for 6. And next turn you're dead. Like, if you don't kill, I mean, that's how powerful this thing is that it turns really great permanents that you'd normally really like to have into actually just do a bunch of damage. It's going to be the GOAT there, I think.
No, not going to be close. No.
Next is Goblin Rabblemaster. Now, this one is a little bit interesting to me because this is a pure damage output card for the most part. It does create some tokens and do a few interesting things, but it's really good at it. Like, it is an absolute board state in and of itself. Like, it is the type of card that you can play by itself and it will win you the game if left unchecked. So that's kind of interesting. Where do you have Rabblemaster? Is it falling too much into that old school realm for you, or does it earn its keep?
No, it's fine. Like, this is a pretty good card. It's got the normal like skull clamp type combos, but I think mostly it's that Rabblemaster just provides some good value. I think it's an overall pretty good value card, and
I do too.
I think that I'm happy to play it in any like aggressive or mid range deck. I'm not good in a control deck, of course.
And this one, by the way, is another one that hits that blood pressure scale where it's like, ooh, you got Rabblemaster?
If they go Rabblemaster on the play, let's say turn 2 off a Mox, and you're just like, don't have a way to kill it. You're just like, oh, I'm going to take so much damage next turn. It's like unbelievable.
It really adds up fast. And this next card, by the way, this was another one of those ones that took just a little bit to catch on. Also because they brought it in with another card. I don't remember what it was, but it was like not as good. But it's Gut True Soul Zealot. This is 2 and a red for a 2/2. And it says whenever you attack, you may sacrifice another creature or an artifact. And if you do, you get a 4/1 skeleton that's with menace that's tapped and attacking. This thing piles on damage very, very, very quickly.
I mean, it's unbelievable how much damage this card does. Like, use the Voldaren Epicure example. Let's say you just play a Voldaren Epicure, then turn 3, you go gut, attack, sack the treasure, take 4 or 5 actually. Next turn, sack the Epicure, you're just dead. Like, the second skeleton from gut basically always kills you. The first one puts you, and here's the kind of similarity between all these cards, right? Like this one, Minsk and Boo, Bombardiers, all of them. It's like they put you in a position where you take a bunch of damage, and then if you deal with the thing, you have something else still to deal with. Like that, right? Like you still have problems here. So
right, that's why Rabblemaster is still relevant. Like, it did that before it was cool to do that. Yeah,
and it does in a lesser way. Like that's why Rabblemaster is a 7th pick, not a first pick. But it's still a very good card.
Yeah, but Gut has been very impressive. It is an absolute clock, and these type of cards, the Bombardiers and Gut and the Lelius, what we're going to talk about next, are exactly what we talk about when we say like the cube right now is bent towards 3s, and it's bent towards do stuff now. Like, I do not want to play a card that says if I get to untap with this, it might be pretty good. Like, that is not where things are at. Like, right now, you can play Broadside Bombardiers and smash your opponent, get something off the board or get in a bunch of damage and still, and if they untap and answer it, you're still in a decent spot. Gut is the exact same way. Rabblemaster is, but to a lesser extent. And like this next card is often that way too, which is Lelia, the Blade Reforged, which this is to me the OG now for setting the tone for these type of cards. This was the first of these red cards in my mind where I was like, this is different. Like this card is not just trying to get damage through. This thing is like card advantage, and it's like a big pain in the butt to deal with, and it gets huge. It's the 2 and a red 2/2 haste, and whenever it attacks, you can exile top card of your library, and you can play that card this turn. And whenever you exile one or more cards from your library or your graveyard, she gets a +1/+1 counter. And this, funny enough, has fallen slightly down because of cards like Gut and Broadside Bombardiers, but I still think it's a solid card. Definitely earns its spot in the cube. But again, this to me is poster child for give me something now. Like this has haste, it exiles you. If you got a land drop to give, you can do it. If it's a cheap card, you can cast it. It's good at any time in the game, and it's a really fast clock as well.
Yeah, I mean, it takes a little bit of work, but it doesn't take that much.
Yeah, I love I mean, I still think Lelia is a really good card. And for a while, it was definitely in that 3-drop creature slot, and red, it was the best one. But it turns out they keep printing cards. Next card, man, I could just not be less interested. This is Phyrexian Dragon Engine, the 3-mana 2/2 double striker.
It's another Welder card.
Yeah.
By the way, on Lelia, it's going to be in Modern. It's in
Lelia
Modern
is going to be
3.
in Modern?
It's in Modern Horizons 3. It's going to be playable in Modern.
Wow, I guess Modern's just Legacy now, but wow, okay. I would play that card if I could. I mean, I don't really. Anyway, whatever. So Dragon Engine is a welder card, I guess. Is that what they're trying to make welder happen?
If you weld it back into play, you can draw the cards. You can unearth it, of course. Goblin Engineer puts it in the graveyard, so even if they kill the engineer, you can unearth it. Again, if you like the welder stuff, if you think that's good enough, then keep this card. I think is actually fine. If you're not into that sort of thing, then this card doesn't need to be in the cube.
Well, I'll tell you who's not into that sort of thing. You and everybody you play against on the Cube Draft server.
Well, I'm telling you, I'm just trying.
I never see you go, oh no, they have a welder and a Phyrexian Dragon Engine. I'm so screwed, you guys. Or I never see you go, well, now that I've got this welder, I'm going to get this Phyrexian Dragon Engine and we're going to go off. When does that ever happen? Have you ever lost to this card?
No, but I've done one draft with welder and engineer back in my cube, and I had the stupid Triarch guy that I was talking about, and it was good. So I think the time, and I had Dragon Engine too. I had a sick play where I go Goblin Engineer, put Dragon Engine in the graveyard, play Lion's Eye as my last card, sack it to bring back the Dragon Engine right away, draw 3 attack.
Okay, that's pretty cool.
I mean, you got some things going here, but I do think that in general, Dragon Engine is not good enough by itself.
Okay, so maybe it's just that strategy is on the edge of being good enough, and once it gets enough toys, it tips it over. I think
that getting 3 or 4 new good cards to go with it is enough.
Okay. But, to be fair, I would rather see that. Tell,
and I will say that the current Magic Online cube, it is not good enough, and I would not have it in there if it were up to me.
Okay, I would rather see them add a few more to see if they can make that happen than to just cut all this stuff. But as it sits, it's not pulling its weight. Next is old school again, Rampaging Ferocidon.
Yeah, this is again another
perfect
one of those
example.
red only attack cards. This has a little bit more depth where there's some matchups where the life gain aspect does matter. It's pretty beefy, so it can kind of do it by itself. It's not like the 1-drops, which need some help. So I've seen Rampaging Ferocidon be fine in a red-blue tempo burn deck with Vendilion Click and Malcolm and bolts and counters against a green deck. You play the Ferocidon and attacks for 6 and deals another 3 based on triggers. But it's on the bottom end of the list for sure.
Right. And this is a good example of what we're not valuing right now. Give me something right now for us, and it gives you only a little bit. Last one is Seasoned Pyromancer. Still good?
Seasoned Pyromancer is still very good. It's the casting cost is of course a little bit prohibitive. Double red is a thing, but it's got discard synergies with various reanimate or welder type stuff, or just valued skull clamp. It's good with it's just a good card. I generally like to take this card around 5th or 6th in that range, 5th plus, And I generally play it if I'm heavy red. It's one of the rewards for being slightly heavier red. Like, you can't always play this card. It's a world of difference between a card that's castable for a single red versus a double red. It's just crazy how much that matters.
It is, yeah, especially when there's so many amazing cards that only cost single red that we've just gone over. Okay, so the GOAT for the 3-drops is going to be Broadside Bombardiers, but
the funny thing is, I don't think it's close. Gut is good, but I don't think it's actually that close.
What is next? Is it Gut? Is it Lelia?
Gut and Lelia are similar. Gut, I think, is better, but has a lower floor and takes more setup. Lelia, like you said, you can put into any deck that can cast it. Lelia is good at. There's just no deck that it's not.
This is such an interesting category to me, man. These 3-drop red cards, like, these are what I think of when I think of the cube now.
Strongest now.
Yeah.
Like, I think you look at red now and you're just like, of red's 5 best cards, right? Like Lightning Bolt, Ragavan, are outside of this category, but Bombardiers is inside this category.
Yep.
I think it's actually better than both of those cards. I think Bombardiers is a busted card. And then Gut and Lelia, I think, are a step below, but are still like in the kind of in the contention. Oh, and the other 3-drop red creature we're going to get to later because it's an enchantment, but Fable the Mirror Breaker is right up here too.
Totally. And this is what I think of. Like, when I think of Vintage Cube now, these are the cards I think about. I think about Lelia, and now I think about Bombardiers, Gut, and Fable. Like, this to me is the meaty center of how games are won now in Vintage Cube. Where before, there's times when I would have said Treachery, or I would have said some expensive mana ramp payoff, or, mana drain, or something like that. That would have been the cards that kind of come to mind when I think about, what's really kind of going on in Vintage Cube. And right now, it's Gut, it's Broadside Bombardiers, those type of cards.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I think the green decks have a really good opportunity for leverage of casting a 1-drop, a Birds or Noble. Noble's especially sick because Exalted is so relevant.
Totally. Into
a Gut or a Lelia or a Broadside Bombardiers or a Fable, and that's how I like to draft red green. And I think these are the cards that this is what's going on now.
Definitely onto something there. 4-drops. There's only 3 of them. First one is FTK Flametongue Kavu.
Yeah, totally fine. I mean, it's
still a real boy.
Yeah, it is. It's not as feared as it was during, Invasion Block Limited, but it's still just a very, very good card. And I will main deck it in decks that want to be a little more reactive, and then I'll sideboard it in decks that are looking to fight some creatures that way.
Yeah, and for me, it meets that simple criteria that I've laid out. What do you do for me right now when you cast me? Well, you kill something, so good enough. Hellrider.
Right. I mean,
just
it's
pure
playable,
damage output.
The double color and the cost is kind of a bummer, given that it is the kind of card that you're not going to be the heavy red deck that often anymore.
Right. I mean, this might be illustrative of kind of what's going on here, right? But like, Broadside Bombardiers is just literally apples to apples better card than Hellrider, right? Like, even if Hellrider was 2 in a red.
Yeah.
I mean, Hellrider 2 in a red would be pretty freaking broken, right? Like, yes, I mean, that is an insanely really good card, but I think I'd rather have Bombardiers than that. And Hellrider costs an additional red mana as it's printed. I mean, that is upside down, right? When you're saying like an easier to cast and less mana, like 1 less mana card is on par or maybe even just better than a card that costs like an entire, I mean, that kind of encapsulates it. If it's even in the discussion, something's weird.
Right.
And the last one is Rampaging Raptor, which is okay too, right? This is fitting. This is all kind of under the umbrella of the green 4-drops that have this type of thing too. Whatever, like the, what's it called? The original 4/4, blah, 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 with all this like stuff.
Questing Beasts?
Yeah, Questing Beast. Thank you. It's like a Questing Beast light.
Yeah.
Which is fine, right? I mean, being able to attack a player and kill a planeswalker they control at the same time is fine. And haste does fill that requirement for what I want out of these cards. It's just like a lesser powered version, and the double red stuff too.
Yeah. I mean, it is totally fine. It's not something that I'm like in a big hurry to want to get into my deck, but it's a totally fine card. And look, when you cast a Rampaging Raptor and attack them and just bash them out on an empty board or on a board where you're just like slightly ahead, it is pretty strong.
It is. It makes an impact on the game. These are not three particularly important cards, but which one is the best of FTK, Hellrider, or Rampaging Raptor?
I'd say FTK. FTK just has a really big impact when you play it. And
it's more flexible.
Yeah.
Okay. There's 3 5-drop creatures here. And one of them does represent the new era here. It's Fury. There was also a time when I thought about Vintage Cube, and cards like Fury and Solitude were the ones that my brain went to. That wasn't very long ago, by the way, and these cards are still very, very relevant. But Fury's awesome. Amazing. Like, fantastic card.
Hitting planeswalkers, costing no mana. Like it's just a really, really messed up card.
It is. And when you cast it, it's just really gross too. Clears off their board and leaves you this like mega threat.
You can reanimate it, you can blink it. Like there's a lot of combos. Fury's a premium card. Like, and one of the ways to get an advantage in this new faster cube is to have spells that cost 0. And Fury's like the perfect spell because it catches you up when you're behind.
Mm-hmm.
Or you drop the hammer when you're ahead. I mean,
right.
We're going to talk about Pyrokinesis later, but it's like worse than Fury in almost every way, and it's still good enough.
And it's still okay, and that says how good Fury is. Next is Glorybringer. It's fine, right?
Fine.
Yeah, the knock on these is that they're 5.
Yeah, so there's actually a bunch of dragons. There's Glorybringer, Bonehorde, Dracosaur, Thundermaw, Hellkite, and Goldspan Dragon. Those are like the big ones, and currently there's Glorybringer and Goldspan in, and I think you can basically. I think Thundermaw is at this point the weakest, but I think any of the other ones, whatever number you want, 0, that's fine. You want 1, that's fine. You want 2, that's fine. They're all just fine. Like you don't have to prioritize them because they cost 5 mana, but at some point, like it can be pretty good to play.
Yeah, and the other one is Goldspan, as you mentioned, and both of these to me pay you back for your mana. They are worth the 5 mana. It's just not an inflection point right now. Like the 5 mana slot isn't really where games are won and lost. Like that happens at the 3. So, but if you need a 5, these are both perfectly fine, perfectly interesting. They both have haste, which is like basically a requirement for me at this point for cards like this. And then they both do very different, but very good things to the board. They either clear out space or they give you a huge mana bump. And those are both relevant and useful in the Vintage Cube for sure. But Fury for sure is the GOAT of these 5 drops. Like,
Fury is unquestionably the best.
We may be able to set up like a shortcut where we just take whatever the newest card is, and it's just like that's the GOAT. Right? Like,
that, I mean, you're not wrong.
That's like kind of
that is often going to be the case.
6 drops. These are kind of interesting. They're very, very different from each other. The first one is Inferno Titan. So first off, does it earn its spot still? It's classically held that middle line position between being a reanimation target that's just worth it, but also being castable, in games where it goes a little bit longer. Yeah,
I would say it is barely there. Like the problem, and we talked about this with Grave Titan, and this is obviously similar. I'd say Inferno, Primeval, and Grave all share this characteristic of when you sneak it into play, it's not like whether it's reanimate or sneak attack or whatever, it's not busted. But when you cast it, it's also not busted. So it's like I wish it was either more expensive and more powerful or cheaper and less powerful. Like I'd rather either cast a Glorybringer or reanimate an Atali. Inferno Titan's like the worst of all of those worlds.
It is. Also, the comparison between Fury and Inferno Titan is tough.
That it is.
So yeah, I would say Inferno Titan hanging on by a thread, but potentially on the way out. But the next card, totally different thing. It's Oliphant, which has actually been really good. Like,
yeah, Oliphant's awesome.
Yeah, it's funny because we were just saying that Inferno Titan's like not quite good enough of a reanimation target, but Oliphant does get reanimated a fair bit because it's like free-ish, right? And it's like, okay, well, turn 2, I guess I'll just, like, I don't have any other targets and I cycled it for a land on 1. So here's an Oliphant, like deal with that, right? And it's like, it's actually kind of good enough. And then, the fact that it can search up, it can basically be like a super mana fixer with triumphs and stuff just makes it I heard you describe this on one of your videos. It was a simple description, but it was like, that's exactly why it's good, which is that it is almost a land, right? It is just like one small step away, almost a risk-free, mountain cycle. It's colorless mana to mountain cycle it. Like, it is really like the lowest cost you could really get to have this, but you just get another spell in your deck in that slot. And it might be a Oliphant that you cast for 6. It might be something that you reanimate. It might be food in the graveyard for you to exile to something or whatever. But it is not literally free, but it is so close to being free. And you get this random upside of searching up a mountain, air quotes, whatever that form may be, whether it's a dual or tri-land or a basic.
Yeah. I mean, Oliphant is just it's the exact kind of card you want, filling out your mana base. They're just mana fixing plus extra spells. Plus it's got reanimate combos too.
Yeah. So it definitely holds its own. The last one is an interesting one. It's Trumpeting Carnosaur, which is the 4 red 7/6 trample, and when it ETBs, you discover 5, but you can pay 2 and a red and discard it to do 3 damage to a creature or planeswalker. That is a nice fit, right? Like Reanimator, kill a creature, reanimate the thing, and you get to discover 5 when it ETBs, not when you cast it. So like it works in all of those ways. You can also just cast it for 6, kind of like Inferno Titan style, where it's like, well, I just ended up getting to 6 mana, or I had a Black Lotus and I played it on turn 3, and it is a freaking 7/6 trample that gets you another spell. And sometimes that spell's really good. I mean, it's discover 5. Like, sometimes you really hit off of it. That said, I don't find myself prioritizing Trumpeting Carnosaur. And if I find what will be, I'm just going to group Atali in with these because they're close enough. I will almost always take Atali, for the upside of Reanimator over Trumpeting Carnosaur for the sort of middle ground ability to use its discard ability and that kind of stuff. Where do you find yourself with the Carnosaur?
It's a little better than Inferno Titan in the sense that like you can use the 3 mana ability and that works pretty well. It's a little weaker when you actually reanimate it or cast it, but it's still like, I think, solid. And so overall, I think that Trumpeting Carnosaur is not a high priority, but is a card I'm happy to play in the right circumstance.
Okay. Now, what about Atali? This thing is really powerful. I love
Atali. Atali is good because I like Atali because it's really powerful, works with like almost every single thing. It works with like Goryo's Vengeance, Shallow Grave. You can even flash it in and kind of roll the dice there. It also is castable. Like you can cast Atali. I've cast it plenty of times. It's not like Gristlebrand's not really castable. Atali, I would say, is castable. And you kind of combine all those things and you end up with a card that works in a lot of different decks, which I think is pretty sweet. It's
also interesting, right? It, like when you spin with Atali, like there are many, many different like you can hit a random counter spell off of one and then a 3-drop and you're like, okay, that was pretty, I got a 3-ball out of it. But like I was playing 2 days ago before the cube went off again and my opponent reanimated Atali and hit their own Emrakul. Right. And it's like, oh, okay. Well, I guess that's,
that is a thing you can do.
You get that, right? So you get this really wide range of like, sometimes it's 2 value cards. Sometimes it's 1 really good card, 1 bad card. Sometimes you miss, effectively with it. And it does lead to moments, right? Where you're like, okay, we're still playing Magic or whatever. And like you said, it is sort of the perfect middle ground reanimation card at this point. I would put it at number 1 of these. It's a little unfair because it costs 7, but like of cards I pick, it's Atali and then Oliphant and then the other 2.
Yeah, I agree.
There's 2 planeswalkers that are just red right now in the cube. One of them is Chandra, Torch of Defiance.
Totally fine card.
Totally fine, right? Just a mid-range thing.
Yeah.
The fact that it does 2, that you can just have it plus to do 2 really matters. Like that was a nice thing to add on to a red planeswalker like this, where like you can just use it as a damage source if you're way ahead or trying to close out the game. But then in every other scenario, you're trying to like get value out of it. And then the other one, this is going to go on this now growing list of trying to make Goblin Welder happen. I guess it's Duretti Scrap Savant.
I've cut this one a while ago.
Yeah.
I don't think Duretti's good enough.
Mom
Like,
spaghetti.
it just is not gonna. It just doesn't get the job done. Chandra's totally great. Like Chandra's another reward for being heavy red.
Yeah.
Where if you have Chandra out, like the ideal and very often play pattern is play Chandra, kill your creature. You have an empty board. Next turn you play something, then use Chandra to start drawing cards or adding mana, and like that all works out just fine.
It's a very well balanced planeswalker for the Vintage Cube. Instance. This is traditionally a place where red really shines. Let's see if it's held up. First card out is Burst Lightning. That's the one that does 2 damage, or you can kick it for an additional 4 to do 4 damage.
Yeah, Burst Lightning's fine. I mean, the best are Bolt and Chain Lightning, but Burst Lightning is an acceptable card.
Yeah, I feel like, should we be valuing these cards higher? Like, think of how many of the cards that we talked about at the 3-drop slot. Yeah. I mean, maybe even higher. Like, think about like Bombardiers, Lelia, Goblin Rabble Master, Fable, right? Like, a Burst Lightning solves these problems. Gut. Like,
yeah, Burst Lightning is fantastic.
That's
I basically never cut it.
I mean, if you're worried about those cards, this is a way you can combat that. And the next card up is the all-timer Lightning Bolt.
It's still the best, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Still the GOAT. Next is a Braid. There's relevant targets for a Braid besides there's relevant artifact targets for a Braid, right?
Yeah. A Braid is a touch worse than Bolt and Chain Lightning. I would say a touch better than Burst Lightning.
Okay.
It's just the fact that it's good against non-creature decks goes a long way.
Yeah. Yeah, much more flexible. This was a recent addition. Shrapnel Blast is back in. That's 1 red instant. As an additional cost to cast it, you have to sack an artifact. Like, you have to do that. But it does deal 5 damage to a creature or player.
I'm not really sold on this artifact aggro push. It feels like not enough has been added.
Yeah, maybe so. Maybe they need
like
your
I just haven't run
cards.
Into the deck heavy enough in artifact that also wants a 2-mana deal 5, because that's like a kind of specific deck. Like,
it is.
It feels to me like if you're going to do that, put it in Soul Artifact, put in Zoetic Glyph, and just like lean into it.
Yeah. I guess this technically fit over here as well. It's Delayed Blast Fireball. Didn't we already cover that? Where was? Oh, that was in our Crack-a-Pack. Okay. But we did already talk about that card. The next one, boy, I wonder if these just need to all go. Like, it's Seething Song.
So most of them have. Desperate Ritual and Rite of Flame have been cut. Seething Song is more of a like mid-range card where you're using it to ramp out a Glorybringer or something along those lines. Mm-hmm. And I think it works okay there. You have to have like a very specific deck, but when one of the cards that we've added both Elvish Spirit Guide and Simian Spirit Guide, the ones where you pitch from your hand to get a mana. Seething Song is kind of like those cards where it's just, there are some cards that are powerful enough that being down a card in order to cast them a turn or 2 earlier is worth it. And when you cast a Goldspan Dragon on turn 3 instead of turn 5, I mean, it pays you back for that Seething Song very quickly. Mm-hmm. So I think that Seething Song is on the bottom end of cards in the cube, but is definitely a fine inclusion.
Yeah, I think I would just cut it. Like, especially at this point, like if you tap 3 mana, including a red, like I'm holding my breath, right? And if it's Seething Song, somehow that should be like really bad news for me. But as long as it's not like Bombardiers or one of those things, I'm like, well, if I have an answer, at least you put 2 cards into this stupid dragon and I can kill it or something. I'd much rather, like, it feels to me like it's a much better card, so it's not really a fair comparison, but like you want to get from 1 or 2 mana to 3 a turn early, not from 3 to 5. Like, I like your Simian Spirit Guide way better in here because it lets you go, even if you don't have a Mox, you can go land, turn 2, land, do that, and get one of these nutty 3s going, like right away. I just never take Seething Song just to like power out a 5-drop. Maybe I'm missing the boat on that, but I feel like if my opponent does that, I'm kind of like, no, that's not that bad for me. Mind Collapse. I'm kind of grouping some of these together, the mana cost wise, because Mind Collapse is 4
Yeah,
or
you
0.
you can't do the instants by mana cost. There's just 1 or 2 in each category. So this is the 3 in a red instant, deal 5 to any creature during your turn only. So it's not always on. You can sack a mountain to cast it, and it's no snuff out, but it's still pretty good. When you go like Goblin Rabble Master and they like play a creature, and then you're like play a 4-drop Mind Collapse, your 3-drop attack you, like you just like the game ends right there.
That is a nice sequence, yeah.
Yeah, basically when you have good pressure, Mind Collapse is amazing. It's less good, like I don't like it in like a blue-red control deck because you just don't want to sack a land, but in like a black-red aggressive deck, if you've got a Gut, Lelia, any of the good red 3-drops in play, casting a Mind Collapse is just super, super positive value for you.
Okay, so you like it in the cube, it would stick?
Yeah, I think Mind Collapse is great.
Is it in your cube?
It is.
Okay. Through the Breach, which we talked about before. And then the last 2 are Fire Blast. That's the one where you can sack 2 mountains to do 4 damage to anything, or you can pay good old 6 mana for it if you'd like.
Yeah. Fire Blast is maybe the red aggressive card I like the most because it's actually really powerful. 0 mana deal 4 is nuts. Obviously,
nuts.
You need to end the game because otherwise the fact that you're down 2 lands is a big problem. But like I've had blue-red or black-red decks that actually do get to play Fire Blast and are happy about it that wouldn't have wanted like a Beaumont Courier or a Monastery Swiftspear. So Fire Blast is cuttable, but I think it does hold its own, at least for now.
And then Pyrokinesis, you mentioned you wanted to talk about that too in comparison with
this
Fury.
Is 4 red instant, deals 4 to creatures only, not planeswalkers, not players. Divided as you choose, but you can exile a red card from your hand to pay for it. And it's part of the Force of Will cycle. If you have a deck that has no Moxes, that has no pitch cards like Pyrokinesis, Force of Will, Force Negation, and doesn't have enough like 1 and 2 mana plays, you're going to have a hard time in Cube these days.
Definitely.
Like, Pyrokinesis can take, let's say let's use the example of blue-red again. You drafted a decent blue-red deck. It has Mana Leak. It has Memory Lapse. It has like a Preordain, and maybe you've got some good, some Planeswalkers, whatever. If you don't have Moxes, you better have Lightning Bolt and Spell Pierce and Flame Slash, or something like Pyrokinesis. Or when you're on the draw and your opponent plays a 1-drop into a 2-drop, you're just going to lose. Or your opponent plays a Mox or something. You need some way to balance the scale. So it doesn't mean that you have to have power. It doesn't mean that you have to have mana acceleration or even necessarily like 1-drop interaction. But you need something that you can do that will interact in some way with what your opponent is doing or pressure them. Obviously, the flip side of this is just be a white weenie deck that's curving out. Because if you're not doing something useful in the first 2 to 3 turns of a vintage cube game, like you are just going to lose. Almost no good deck is going to give you time to do that. Mm-hmm. So, and it doesn't mean every game has to be like that, but you just in general, that's what you should be striving for. And Pyrokinesis carries a lot of weight against the aggressive decks while also just being useful every now and then against non-aggressive decks. Fury is a lot better because it can hit Planeswalkers. That's a huge difference. Mm-hmm. But Pyrokinesis is still a card. If I'm moderately heavy red, like if I have, 8 other red cards, I'm just not cutting this card very often.
Okay. So yeah, that's a good addition and one that should stick. Lightning Bolt, the GOAT from the instance.
Oh yeah, not close.
Still crazy after all these years. Sorceries, Chain Lightning, the other Lightning Bolt, still really good.
Really good. I love Chain Lightning. It's the second best of the burn spells. Like one of the things I like when I'm drafting Underworld Breach is if I have a bolt or Chain Lightning, you can just kill them with 7 bolts or 6 bolts in a lot of times. Whereas you don't need like a Brain Freeze, for example. And it's just so efficient. Hits Planeswalkers, finishes off players, just does it all.
I love how your brain works. Faithless Looting. This was put back in recently, right? I feel like it was gone for a while, or is that just my brain? Was it?
I don't believe it's ever been out, or at least not.
Okay, maybe I just spaced on that. What do you think about Faithless Looting?
I think you need to have a reason to put it in your deck, but there's a lot of reasons to do so. So what I mean by that is I'm not putting this in like any red-white deck that's ever existed, first of all, or red-green decks. I'm going to play it in red-blue if I have cards like Underworld Breach or Dig Through Time. If I have, reasons to stock up my graveyard or flashback cards. Red-black is where it's at its best because you're discarding creatures to reanimate generally. And I think that overall, it doesn't take much for me to play Faithless Looting, but you do need something. Currency converter. Like the most common use is in reanimator decks, but there's a lot of the red-blue spell-heavy combo style decks where Faithless Looting works out well.
Okay. Yeah. Definitely deserves a slot. Next is Firebolt. Sorcery speed does 2, and then you can flash it back for 4 and a red. Probably still holding its own, right?
Yeah, I mean Firebolt's totally fine. It's I think worse than Burst Lightning. But it's not
I think so too.
It's not a card I'm cutting that often, but I'm not also taking it super highly.
Yeah, I value instant speed removal like extra high right now because so many things have like haste or care about attacking, where before it was like, you got your ETB ability, but I'm going to untap and kill the actual creature. It just doesn't really feel like that now, again, especially coming off of the cards we just talked about in red specifically. Flame Slash. Do you really want to give up instant speed and the ability to hit anything else just to get to 4 damage on a creature?
I mean, that's not exactly the way I'd think about it, because it's not often that you're like, am I going to take Flame Slash or Burst Lightning or Lightning Bolt? It's more like, is Flame Slash a good enough card to take and play? And the answer is yes. Like, I think Flame Slash is great. Getting to kill a questing beast or something along those lines is a huge upside. Yeah, Lightning Bolt and Chain Lightning are better. In fact, I'm just going to rank them right now. It's Lightning Bolt, followed by Chain Lightning, followed by Abrade, followed by Burst Lightning, followed by Flame Slash, followed by Firebolt, I think. Firebolt and Flame Slash are closer. Mind Collapse is somewhere near the bottom of that, though if you're the more aggressive you get, the better it gets. But like, yeah, compare Mind Collapse and Flame Slash. Like, I think I'd rather have Flame Slash most of the time.
Okay.
Like, Mind Collapse is kind of a sorcery. You can only cast it on your turn.
Right. For its ult. Yeah. Okay. So definitely worth having in the cube. What about Arc Trail?
Yeah. Arc Trail's a little borderline. The last time I tried to cut it from my cube, people like really wanted it in, so I kept it in.
You had an Arc Trail revolt?
Well, I just more like posted a list of here's the cards I'm thinking about cutting, and everyone wanted Arc Trail to stay.
Okay.
The only thing I don't like about Arc Trail is like it really sits on green more than it needs to. It's like, do you really need another way to punish birds?
Right.
But it is good against White Weenie, which I actually do like because White Weenie is so good. And overall, it's a fine card. It leads to interesting play situations where you like maneuver things such that an Arc Trail is really devastating. That can be fun.
Yeah, combat and stuff like that. Tribal Flames is in here. They, a few iterations ago started to push this domain thing. And the domain thing it comes fairly easily thanks to the triomes and stuff. And Tribal Flames it's not hard to make it 4 or 5 damage for 2 mana.
Yeah.
The question is, do you want to do that?
So I was initially skeptical of the domain stuff, but now I've come around on most of it. I think Rada's Firebrand is still below the bar for me, but the Neshoba Brawler is close. But I like Tribal Flames, and I really like Territorial Kavu and Scion of Draco. When you go turn 1, fetch Zagoth Triumph, turn 2, Plateau, and cast a Scion or a 5/5 Kavu, like that is sick.
Kavu is really good.
Yeah. I like all these cards, and I think Tribal Flames is pretty neat. This is just anyone who's listened to us talk about draft, in depth will not be surprised. I like cards that reward you for drafting a specific way that other people don't get the value from. Like Domain rewards you for taking triumphs and fetches and setting up the domain stuff. Like that's why I find Gut to be at least a little more interesting than Broadside Bombardiers. Gut, if you don't draft in a way to make Gut good, it's not good. I've cut Gut from red decks or not taken it. Bombardiers is just like so unbelievably good that you just will play it in every deck and it's always great. So I think it's good to have both kinds of cards in draft. It's fun to open an Ancestral Recall and know you're supposed to take it no matter what. But I think it's pretty cool when you're like, ooh, I got a 5th pick Currency Converter. That's a first pickable card for my deck, but no one else wants it. Ooh, I got a 7th pick Lion's Eye Diamond. Or I wield Dark Depths for my Depths Stage Crop Rotation Fast Bond deck, or Zern Orb. Like these build-arounds in Cube, just like in normal sets, that reward you for doing the work to make them good. That's what makes draft interesting. And I do kind of view that as this sort of example.
Yeah, and it's nice that you can get these cards later, right? You can wheel a Tribal Flames if you're the one doing the thing, and you get a powerful card. A 2 mana, 5 damage or 4 damage is a lot. Wheel of Fortune. That's an important card.
Yeah, Wheel's good. Wheel is a bit TRGR. I think that what I mean by that is the rich get richer. When your deck has sick mana acceleration, you've got you opened a Mox, and then you second picked a Fast Bond, and then you third picked a Wheel, and it's just like, oh, we are on. Or even just like the less extreme version of like, it's pack 2, you see a third pick Wheel, and you already have not only a Mox, but like you're playing like the Academy deck that has Currency Converter and it has some talismans. And like that's the sort of thing where Wheel's really good. In a normal deck, like a normal blue-red deck or blue or red-black deck that doesn't have acceleration, I'm just not in for putting Wheel of Fortune in that deck, because how are you getting an advantage? The ways to get an advantage from Wheel of Fortune, there's like a couple different ones. One is you never pass the turn back, and that's the like Fast Bond combo. I'm going to cast Wheel, draw, play some more things, Underworld Breach, Lion's Eye Diamond, win in one shot.
Right.
There's also, I'm going to empty my hand first, so I have mana acceleration again, but I'm not trying to combo. I'm just like, I've played Wheel in red-green decks that have a bunch of 1-drops, and you're just like, turn 1 bird, turn 2 3-drop, turn 4 1-drop plus Wheel, and I discard 2 and draw 7, you discard 5 and draw 7.
Right, just break that synergy, that symmetry, yeah.
And pick 1, pack 1. I just don't have confidence that I'm going to end up there enough of the time that I'm like, I would take Lightning Bolt over Wheel of Fortune, pick 1, pack 1. I don't think. But
what close. About the Bowmasters and Hull Breachers?
Oh, that's the other aspect. Yeah, perfect point. You also have the Hull Breacher, Bowmasters, Narset, Leovold kind of thing, and that's another example of, if I get a Bowmasters or a Hull Breacher, I'm going to be pretty happy. I'm not going to take Wheel hoping to get one. I do it the other way around.
I see.
If I first picked Bowmasters and my second pick was Wheel or Bolt, I would take Wheel in a heartbeat.
I see.
But pick 1, pack 1.
Now, with the other draw 7s, though, are there ones that you would like say this is good enough? Like, would you take Time Spiral proactively?
Well, I'm not saying I wouldn't take these cards. They are powerful cards and you can draft around them, but I don't view them as like ideal pick 1s.
Well, what I'm asking is Wheel of Fortune? Is it any draw 7 would fit into that category that you said?
The tiers of draw 7s early, I think Wheel and Time Twister are by far the two best because it just costs 3 mana.
Okay.
I think Time Spiral can build itself to being better in like the big mana decks where you're untapping an Academy or you have your Fast Bond, you have a ton of lands in play.
Okay.
Memory Jar is always the worst. Sail in the West is also like a step above Memory Jar, but worse than all the rest of them.
And what about Echo?
Echo's tricky because it's in the middle, except if you get exactly Lion's Eye Diamond or Faithless Looting Currency Converter stuff, though LED is the GOAT with this, Echo becomes as good as Wheel of Fortune and Time Twister.
Because like it's going to be 3, yeah.
But you need to be able to discard it.
I see. Okay. So that's still, that's a card that's demanding a lot of attention from you at the sorcery, in red here, Wheel of Fortune. Last one, by the way, don't want to gloss over this one. It's Fiery Confluence. That's a game ender.
Love this one.
Yeah, this one's really good against Luis's decks a lot of the time, but it is 2 red, a sorcery, and you can choose 3 things, and you can choose the same mode multiple times if you want. It does 1 damage to each creature, 2 damage to each opponent, or you can destroy an artifact. So you could destroy like 3 artifacts, or you can do 6 damage to your opponent, which is an often chosen mode because it's such a game ender. I mean, there's not very many spells in Magic that can do 6, 1 spell does 6 damage to the opponent.
And this is just the poster child for why flexibility matters. How good would a card that was 2 red deal 6 to your opponent be?
Yeah, very narrow. Yeah.
Never play it.
Right.
How good would a card that was 2 red deal 3 to each creature? Same thing. Same with the artifacts.
Yeah.
But the fact that you get to mix and match and do exactly whichever one you want and whatever proportions you want makes Fiery Confluence probably one of the top 10 red cards. It's somewhere in the 7 to 10 range is my guess.
It's an extremely impactful card. Like, it is very rare that it doesn't have a fair, like, I've seen it wipe 5 creatures off the board. I've seen it kill 3 artifacts and take a Tolarian Academy from being this engine to being like, it doesn't even tap for mana anymore. And then easily the most popular mode is I've seen it just kill people. Like, it's just a game plan.
It's at its best in aggro because they get the kill people mode, the kill you mode, which is super strong. But I would play it in any deck. I've played it in like a blue, red, white control deck where it's just like, this is my sweeper that also works against the artifact decks.
Okay, so what's the GOAT from the sorceries? There's Chain Lightning, there's Wheel of Fortune, Fiery Confluence. Those are your realistic choices.
Yeah, honestly, I think it's probably still Wheel of Fortune just because the potential of the card is the highest.
And it's the most broken.
But I think pick 1, pack 1. Honestly, I think Chain Lightning is probably the highest equity of these cards. If we're just straight up saying like, hey, what's going to lead to the most wins? It's never bad. Every deck wants it. It costs one mana.
Yeah,
it's
totally.
just where you're at, you know?
Yeah. There's 2 artifacts that are red, aligned or whatever. One of them is Pyrite Spellbomb, which I think is another.
Hey, you know what I like doing with this one?
What's that?
Casting it from my graveyard with Lotus.
Oh yeah, you can get a card
really
or
like
start
Pyrite and Ether Spellbombs because they both work with Lotus and they both work in the Artifact Academy style decks, and I think that's like kind of neat. Plus, they're like a little mini combo with Dragon's Rage Channeler because they put an artifact into your graveyard. So I've thought that these have earned their keep. They look a little underpowered, but they consistently do work.
Okay, yeah, I think they've been fine. The other one is Embercleave. Pyrite Spellbomb and Embercleave, like 2 very different cards.
I think that the Magic Online cube could meaningfully improve red by just going and cutting the like 8 remaining only aggressive red cards and just putting in some slightly more well-rounded cards, because that's kind of what red is. It's not that red's even a bad beatdown color. It's still very good at that. It just it doesn't want Lava Spike creatures anymore or cards.
Right.
Cards that could be described in some form or fashion as Lava Spikes or cards that you would play in a deck that wants Lava Spikes are just not where red is, in my opinion.
Right. And Embercleave is that as well. So we'll give GOAT category to Pyrite Spellbomb, I guess. Enchantments. These end up being very important too, particularly for the last 2. The first one has actually it impressed me enough that I think it does deserve its slot. It's Bitter Reunion. That's the 1 in a red enchantment. And when it ETBs, you may discard a card. And if you do, you draw 2 cards and then you can pay 1 and sack it to give creatures haste until end of turn. You know, for your red-black Reanimator deck, this card's kind of cool.
Yeah, I think it's fine. I think it's borderline. Like
definitely cuttable from the cube if nobody would argue.
It's a borderline as a cube inclusion because it really only goes in red-black Reanimator. The idea of using this with Luris is kind of funny, but I haven't actually had that come out. It's a little bit too expensive. But it's fine if you don't want to support red-black quite as much, or you just want room, then I think Bitter Reunion's cuttable, but it's a playable sometimes.
Yeah. Interesting, at least. And then I should have said the last 3, not last 2. Last 3 cards are all just like, wow. So the first one is Underworld Breach, and there was a time that this was the card I thought about when I thought about Cube.
Yeah, I will say that Underworld Breach has gone down in value a little bit for me, not because it's not good, because the combo of basically when you get Underworld Breach, it's actually pretty specific. You're looking for Brain Freeze and ideally Lion's Eye Diamond, but Lotus Petal's a fine substitute, or Frantic Search, or Manamorphose. There's a couple different ways to kind of make that whole thing work, but it's mainly Brain Freeze Breach. And I used to be able to get that pretty reliably, but as people have caught on, it's actually kind of starting to rebound. I drafted Brain Freeze Breach twice yesterday in our team drafts.
Really? They let you get away with it, huh?
Well, it's because there was a period of time where I was drafting it a lot, and then people started hating it aggressively. And then yesterday, in a 3-on-3, I got a Brain Freeze, or maybe it was just 2 days ago, actually, now that I'm thinking about it. I got a Brain Freeze on the wheel and took it because there wasn't much else in the pack. And then I got a Breach in pack 2, and then I got a Lotus Petal in pack 3, and there we go.
Okay.
That was the deck that I sent you that had Time Walk and Underworld Breach.
Oh, yeah.
And it just demolished our opponents there.
That's a really tough deck, yeah.
Yeah. So Underworld Breach is a fantastic card, but you have to be getting the specific thing. In an 8-player draft, it goes up a ton in value. There was just a time where I wouldn't get past Breaches in team drafts very often, or any pieces of the combo except maybe LED. And people have backed off on that a little bit. Plus, in an 8-player draft, you can get an 8th pick Brain Freeze like trivially. Like people just don't take the card if they don't want it. So Underworld Breach is a very strong card. It does not always work, clearly.
Okay. Yeah. It has that insane upside. Next is Fable of the Mirror Breaker. Is this the best red card?
Yeah, I think it's actually the best red card.
Better than Bold, better than Wheel.
If you want to do a red card rank, we do that after this. But I think that Fable is the best overall red card. It's just good. It's so good no matter what.
Yeah. And we've talked about it quite a bit, keep referencing it. But again, this to me is one of those cards that I think about when I think about Cube today, as representing kind of where you want to be or how the Cube works. And Fable the Mirror Breaker does everything. It fits into every deck. It's as good in Cube as it's good in every other format it's been played.
If they can't kill the goblin, you get a Lotus Petal every turn, which is incredible. If they do, you still have the Fable, which means you still get to toss your 2 weakest cards in Cube. That's a really powerful ability, not even factoring in the fact that it lets you discard cards to reanimate or fills your graveyard for Dig Through Time or Breach or whatever. And then the Reflection token is kind of a must kill too, because if like how many games have you seen in Magic Marshall where there's a Reflection token in play and it doesn't die and like the game like continues to go on?
Yeah,
like,
I mean you can wait and see if they get anything else on the battlefield, but like you're playing with fire at that point. And at that point you've already had to trade something for the Goblin token. They've gotten their value in between with the card selection / graveyard stocking, and now you have to deal with this thing. It's one of the best cards, they've printed in the past, 5 years or whatever.
It won the last 3 Pro Tours.
Well, there you go. And then the last card is one that's fallen a bit out of favor, but still has packs a powerful punch. It's Sneak Attack, the 3 and a red enchantment. You can pay red to put a creature card from your hand onto the battlefield, give it haste, and sack it at the beginning of the next end step. Yeah,
Sneak is good. It's gone down a little bit just because the cube's gotten a little faster. You can't sneak. Turn 4 sneak, turn 5 activate is no longer like kind of on par, but it's one of the ways to win the game with Atrox or Emrakul. It's a totally legit way to use those cards. So
definitely,
I like sneak.
I still think it's backup planny to the better strategy, which is Reanimator. Yes, you don't get Emrakul or whatever very often, although you can. There are multiple cards that will allow you to get it back for a turn. But Sneak Attack gives you a different angle to hit, with these huge creatures that you can get. And I would definitely not cut it from the cube. I think it's powerful and interesting.
No,
and
I think
cool card.
I think it makes enough cards work that you still want Sneak in the cube, but it's going down in value.
So Fable wins for the GOAT for the enchantments?
Not only the enchantments, but just overall. I think overall, pick one, pack one rating for red is like Fable, followed by Broadside Bombardiers, followed by Lightning Bolt. Then it gets a little tougher. Those are the top 3. Mm-hmm. I think after that, I guess it's like Lelia, or no, Ragavan is maybe actually Ragavan's over Bolt. So probably, Fable, Bombardiers. I still think Bombardiers is better than Ragavan, followed by Ragavan, followed by Bolt. And I guess number 5 would probably be Wheel, just kind of
probably
to throw Wheel a bone. But honestly, like I do think that Chain Lightning might just be a better an actual
Chain
better card.
Good. And then you've got these insane 3s, with
Gut and Lelia are both fantastic too.
Yeah, exactly.
So, the only reason I have those like slightly lower is they take a little bit more effort and are a little slower than but whatever. All those cards are very good.
Yeah. Red to me is probably the most interesting color right now in the vintage cube. It's changed the most in the last few years to me, for all the reasons that we described here. And it is getting more and more interesting, where before there was a very, very long stretch where red wasn't really interesting. It did what it did. It did it well. It had a lot of good support for basically just the damage output that we've been talking about. But then, now we're seeing Inti, Gut, Lelia, those type of cards, the Bombardiers, that just, yes, they're extremely powerful, but they also it's kind of like when green started getting a bunch of card draw. It kind of feels like that. Like they're honing in on red value, right? What does that look like? And a lot of times it's sacrificing onboard presence to reduce your opponent's board, or it's card selection, right?
Well,
it's discarding cards to gain
the top card of your deck.
A lot of that.
Playing it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's red's card draw now, where you have like Inti and Lelia both go pretty hard on that, where it's like, when you're able to make a cheat lower curve deck, then you get rewarded by these effects.
That's right. Yeah. Red is where I want to be in many ways. And I think it's one of the most interesting colors going right now in the vintage cube. So that was red. We will again continue our journey through vintage cube, going color by color. We'll be doing green next. And we'll look forward to that as well. That's going to do it for this episode of the show. Thank you so much for listening. We really appreciate it. If you want to check out our Patreon, it's patreon.com/limited resources. And we are, of course, sponsored by Ultimate Guard. Make sure you check out ultimateguard.com to see what their product lineup is, and you can pick up their products at your local game store or your favorite online retailer. If you want to find us on social media, I'm Marshall_LR and Luis is LSV, and you can find everything related to the podcast at lrcast.com, including prior versions with white, blue, and black, where we went over every card from the Vintage Cube and those as well, if you want to get caught up on that too. Thank you so much for hanging out. We'll see you next week.
They just put up Vintage Cube Supreme Draft. I want to give a mini primer on on that. So
Supreme.
So how that works is you open up 18 packs of Vintage Cube and you take 2 cards per pack. So basically, you open up a pack, take 2 cards, then open a new pack, take 2 cards. So you draft solo, like no one else.
I was going to say, are these being passed, or I see? So you're just taking the 2 cards you want out of 18. Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So it's kind of like, it actually ends up being kind of like a sealed deck almost. Mm-hmm. And at the end of that, you build a deck. And so you end up with 36 picks. So obviously, if you build a deck, you're going to end up, you can't take too many lands. You're at slightly less, but mostly you end up with busted decks. And I want to kind of give you a little rundown on what I've done a bunch of these so far. They're fun. They fire quickly. What the strategies you want to employ are. First of all, everyone's going to have a bunch of power, because every time you open a piece of power, in fact, every time you open 2 pieces, even, you can take both. So all your decks are going to have like a bunch of Moxes, Time Walk, Ancestral, all that stuff. The best cards besides the power are cards like Hull Breacher and Orcish Bowmasters, because obviously all the draw 7s are a big part of it too. And cheap interaction like Force of Will, Force of Negation, Thoughtseize, Inquisition, all that sort of thing are all just like huge for what you end up drafting here. And you're trying to draft basically some kind of busted deck that's like trying to cast a bunch of draw 7s and play all its Moxes and win with like, it could be a Brain Freeze, it could be a Hull Breacher, draw 7, whatever it is, while also drafting the cards that stop your opponents from doing that. So you're trying to draft like I said, all the Duresses and Force of Will type cards. Don't take any green cards, and don't take any creatures, and don't take any card that costs more than 3 mana that isn't like really busted. And it's a wild ride. Like I think it's pretty fun. I would encourage you to try it if you have a little time to kill. You can do some kind of silly stuff. But it definitely, it's good times, and I've enjoyed the Supreme drafts.